This album was released just recently by a band called the Mentors. It was released on the label Enigma Records, which also launched Motley Crue's career. The album includes songs like 4F Club, Finder, Feeler, Fucker, and Forgetter, Free Fix for a Fuck, Clap Queen, My Erection is Over, and the song Golden Showers, which says these words: listen, you little slut, do as you are told, come with daddy for me to pour the gold. Golden showers, all through my excrements you shall roam, bend up and smell my anal vapor. Your face is my toilet paper, on your face I leave a shit tower, golden shower.
Have a million spider folk, which doesn't even make sense when you consider Peter's origin.
I define everybody that's not Peter Parker as an unoriginal Peter Parker.
Talking about Peter Darker.
Fun fact: Eric used to like the character, even saying he's more than just a black Peter Parker, but he changed his tune when he found out he could make more money pandering to racist comic book fans who hate Miles Morales.
You're just actively making shit up, ha ha ha.
Did you used to like him? Not judging or whatever. Just curious.
No.
Do you like Miles Morales then?
No.
Yeah, some characters have been written decently that are of different races and have suited up in the suit of a hero or a version of that hero. One of the more obvious is Miles Morales as Spider-Man.
You're just actively making shit up, ha ha ha.
Miles Morales has his own background. This is far better than just simply making Peter Parker a black guy.
Talking about Peter Darker.
But Miles is an exception, make no mistake.
I define everybody that's not Peter Parker as an unoriginal Peter Parker.
And it will always be preferable to have another character with his own unique skill set, unique art. This is far better than just simply making Peter Parker a black guy.
I don't understand it.
I woke up late. I had something I had to do. I had an obligation. And I didn't have the time to take a shit like I normally do in the morning. But I had to just push through. And I don't mean push the shit through, because that's what I didn't have time to do. I had to push through and get to my obligation. And sometimes we just have days like that, okay? And when you have a day like that and you have to shit and you got shit to do and you have to fucking make a choice, all right? You got to make a choice. Do I shit or do I do my shit? You got to do that shit. Do your shit, okay? And I don't want to be, I want to be completely clear here. When your choices are take a shit or do your shit, you do your shit and you take that shit and you do it. All right? And yeah, that's what we have to do. Morally, ethically. It's our responsibility as a human who takes shits and who has shit to do. So do your shit.
Make America great and glorious again. I am tonight announcing
the biggest dumps. They call them dumps.
one of the wettest we've ever seen from the standpoint of
big, massive dumps.
Dripping, dripping out very quietly, dripping. Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
Grab him by the pussy.
That you can really stop this kind of thing is to arouse public opinion. It's very upsetting. It has a bad moral effect.
Forced adversity.
When I was a kid, it was too much supper. Now it's comic books.
I'll burn them tomorrow.
Bad, B-A-D-D, bothered about Dungeons and Dragons.
Ask yourself, what's more terrifying? Fear or the frightened?
I think there ought to be a law against them. Tonight I'm going to show you why.
Tonight we are going to show you why, specifically why there should be a law against them. And by them we mean people who want to make stupid laws about things that they shouldn't. Let's outlaw those people. We're going to do a forced adversity to people who do forced adversities, but is it really forced in that case? I don't know. So tonight, bringing on a couple of experts on absurdity. Morgan and Ryan. The regular co-hosts of this show.
Greetings.
I'm feeling a little bit goofy today, guys. I hope you're
Just
okay
a smidgen. That was a very shitty series of clips, Stain, to open us up.
It was crappy. I agree. I'm sorry to put you through all that shit.
Based on those clips, I can only assume that you've been, and keeping with our theme of historic moral panics, I can only assume you've been doing whippets and jenkum.
No, but I mean, maybe we should do an episode on whippets while doing whippets. I don't know.
Okay, so apparently I'm the precious little cinnamon bun here. What on Zod's dead Krypton is a whippet?
You know when you have a can of whipped cream, the squirty cream, and when you press the button, a little bit of gas comes out?
Okay.
There was a popular thing in the sort of 80s and 90s where if you huffed that gas, you got a little bit high.
Just a momentary high thing. The thing is, though, is it is very, very bad for your brain.
Yeah.
And it only lasts a minute, and it's like kind of gives you the wah-wahs. And I'm not speaking from experience here. I didn't do it a bunch of times or anything, but you get you just kind of feel whoa, 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 and your head's like kind of wavy for a second, and then you're like whoa, and then it goes away.
I mean, it's the same sort of high you get from like having a cigarette for the first time, or if you hold your breath for too long.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similar. It's not. I would not advise it. Like when I think about the fact that we just did those without thinking about it as in high school or whatever, and I know now what I know that it does to the brain, which basically just kills a shitload of brain cells in a short amount of time. Yeah. Anyway, welcome to FAPcast, Force Diversity Podcast. Sorry, Ryan, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I think the gas is. I think it's just CO2. So all you're doing is you're starving your brain of oxygen for a few seconds.
Yeah. Which is generally not ideal for the brain.
No, I like my brain to have oxygen. Big fan of that.
The brain likes it too.
It really does.
So it is Sunday. It is finally, after a series of events that kept us from actually getting to this, and still we're not doing exactly what we had. Okay, so we're actually doing what we originally planned for part 2, but then we had also, after we planned for that, added on to that plan, and we're like, well, let's do a whole other thing that's going to be on top of that, and it's really exciting. Well, then we realized, well, we're almost to fucking June anyway, which is Pride Month, and the thing we wanted to do for the episode is kind of just celebrate queer characters and stuff. And so, you know what? We're going to hold off on it and do it in June. And I think we're going to maybe find a way to do a whole Pride Month. I think is that we kind of more or less tossed around.
Yeah, there's certainly plenty of moral panics to go about when you're talking about anti-queer everything.
Well, so I guess that'll be the challenge, and is talking about these fucking shitty events, but also like trying not to, we want to keep it in keep it balanced, right? With celebratory kind of content to a degree. Yeah. So we'll have to work on that. It'll be a challenge, but I definitely don't think it's impossible.
I think we can do it. I believe in us.
The queer people have never been short on celebration despite being oppressed. So I think if they can do it, we can figure it out.
Works for me.
Although, as a side note, I'll be campaigning to move Pride Month to sort of August or possibly September, just so that Pride comes before a fall.
Oh my God, Ryan, you're fired.
Ryan, boo!
I've got more of these. Don't worry, I've got more of these.
God,
please just spare us. But I do have a message.
Spoil the podcaster, I guess.
I have a message for everybody. It specifically names you guys, and I didn't think I should have also addressed the audience, but I had you two in mind when I created this thing. If you couldn't tell, I was playing around with some AI voice stuff that I added to that Ripaverse clip. And so I made this, and hopefully you guys appreciate it.
Hello, Morgan. Hello, Ryan. Very pleased to be with you on this holy day of Bill. May Bill Gaines shine his heavenly light upon you and impregnate you with many happy days and joy fetuses. May your anuses be cleansed by the purifying light that exudes from Bill Gaines' eternal dragon phallus. Should you meet your mortal demise this day, go with comfort that you have satisfied the commands of the one true Bill, those being this: read comic books. Fuck the dumb shit. Be yourself. Love each other. Also, read more comics and grow your hair out all goddamn while. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
God. Okay, so we're having a conversation a while ago, some friends and I, about AI and storytelling and game mastering, and someone we all tangentially knew was convinced that AI was gonna put GMs out of business, and this just proves to me, no, the fuck they aren't.
Well, okay, let me be clear what that is. I wrote that. I literally wrote those words, so blame me for that. I just thought it was funny to hear it from a voice that was AI.
Yeah, well, also the voice cannot, I think there's a human element to storytelling.
True. Yeah, I mean, I think there's got to be like some thinking on the toes that would need to happen. I don't know. I'm just, this whole thing of like, oh, we're not going to need artists anymore. We're not going to need writers anymore. We're not going to need GMs anymore. Just shut up.
Yeah, no, it's so dumb.
It's got to be people who like are just don't have much creativity in them, and they've just tried and they can't be as creative as they thought they could be, and now they're like, oh, thank God, I don't have to try anymore. Nobody has to be better than me because nobody's going to be doing it anymore. That's their fantasy.
I think it's people who don't know what level of artificial intelligence we're at entails. Because while it's very interesting and clever, they're basically just scraping whatever is fed into them and regurgitating it.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about that on the initiative a little bit too. Because, there's no way that you're going to get, it's really a misnomer to call it AI at this point, actually.
Right. Like it is.
Well, I know you're not familiar with Mass Effect too much, Dane, but in that because it's set in the future, AIs have been outlawed, but they have what they call VIs, virtual intelligence. And I think what we're seeing now is probably better described as virtual intelligence.
Yeah.
Because it's in that AI is literally conscious. It's conscious.
Right. That's what I always understood it as. It's like making choices on its own, not just like compiling things that it relates to, Like the way that I understand it is visually represented is, did you see those images that I made that one time where I tried to get the thing to make a man eating a comic book?
Right. And it just did not work.
All the elements are there, right? So it knows what the elements of the image would be. It just doesn't quite put them together in a way that the fucking human is like satisfied with. And I kind of see that as what it would do.
Well, yeah. And it's sort of, I can't remember the exact phrasing of the joke, but the man-eating shark in different contexts is a man-eating shark in the sea is scary. A man-eating shark in a restaurant is less scary.
But cringe.
So a computer doesn't necessarily understand the difference between a man-eating shark and a man-eating shark.
Right.
Well, I mean, the hyphen would be the difference, right?
Yes.
It's the difference between let's eat comma grandma and let's eat grandma.
Right. Let's have grandma for dinner or whatever. Yeah.
I think the age we are in now is definitely more virtual intelligence. And it's essentially what computers do. They take the information you feed to it and delivers what you want it to do. It's no different from a calculator. It's just what's being fed in and spewed out is more complex.
Well, I mean, you're using very specific, definitions of the word artificial in particular there. That's not accurate because it's not. It's artificial because it's not real, but it's also when historically, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking about go look at any science fiction movie that has AI as part of the plot, just any one of them. And AI is going to be a thing that can make decisions on its own, like Skynet.
Right.
That being my entry into understanding AI as a kid.
I would go as far to call what we have today simulated intelligence. It's not
There you go.
really, it's trying to appear like an intelligent, autonomous thinking being, but it's a language module and a Google search had a kid. It's kind of all it is. Like it's you feed data into it to train it, and then it can regurgitate out of what you show it, but it can't come to new conclusions based off of that data set.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to break it down sort of even more simplified than that, like a virtual reality flower will be a computer-generated flower, whereas an artificial flower would be like a plastic and cloth one that you might decorate your house with.
I think you're just kind of reaching for ways that you can make it be what you were trying to make it be. So like Skynet or any other AI in any other context, but what we're talking about is AI in real life right now. You turn it on and then it goes from there on its own. It doesn't need any more input. It learns on its own. That's the key distinction. It continues to learn and its intelligence grows, right? Chat GPT or whatever voice thing or whatever, whatever program you're talking about that we're, in context today, they're not growing their intelligence. In fact, Chat GPT is pretty much at its limit without adding more information, is what the creator said that like basically it's kind of reached a dead end unless it is fed more information. Whereas a proper AI, the singularity, as it would be called, you could look into that if you want to, so you understand a little bit better. Singularity would be once it gets to the point that it is a thinking being on its own and it no longer needs people at all. We still have to feed a command to Chat GPT or whatever program it is.
Yeah, so in the case of Skynet, it's programmed to, well, it's never made exactly clear what it's programmed to do, but the sort of implication is
it's programmed to protect humanity, and then it decides,
yes.
well, humanity is the most harmful thing to humanity.
Right.
Yes, exactly. But the next step it takes then, it by detonating all those nukes, is not something it is told to do.
Right. It's a logical conclusion it came to based on its directive.
And then to build subsequent generations of semi-autonomous robotic beings that are each progressively more advanced than the last. So like one of the other things with AI right now that you don't hear a lot about because it's deep IT nerd shit, and I read a paper on it for work a while ago, is we're also at the hardware limitations of AI, because the actual physical hardware and cooling you need to run those processes like we want to is very resource intensive. You need very specific, very expensive materials and hardware, and you need a tremendous amount of cooling. And for whatever reason, because we're stupid in the IT industry, some of these data centers are in places that are amazingly easy to cool, like Texas, Southern California. And so they're very, very hard to cool, and that's expensive. And the more and more advanced the hardware is, because of how physics works, you need more and more cooling. And that we're certainly not there with the efficiency of cooling by any stretch of the imagination either. So the limitations on AI are software and hardware. It is all of it is at its cap right now.
Bingo, bango, bongo. Yeah. So that's the episode for today. We're talking about AI. Wait,
we're going from the Transformers episode last week into to AI this week.
We're winging it left and right. You know what it is for me personally, why I'm so, I think, kind of fucking carefree today. Like recent events, like basically once you kind of get thrown into a situation like I've found myself in, you kind of just realize, you know what, fuck it all. Like I could basically get on here and fart into the microphone for an hour and it would still be better content and more factual and more responsible than, you know, some other shit. And it's like, you know, I need to relax, just have a good time. And we'll get to it. We'll get to the content, which we're going to do now.
Yay.
So we were at the last we left our timeline, we had gotten to the point where EC Comics had, you know, Bill Gaines himself had testified at Senate hearing for juvenile, what was it? I don't remember the proper name, a juvenile delinquency thing where, you know, basically they held him to account for all these horror comics and they put him in the position to have to essentially say, do you think that this is in good taste? And they're holding up, you know, covers of Tales from the Crypt and stuff with like beheaded women and whatnot. And he's like, yeah, that got plastered on the headlines and the newspapers and stuff. And it didn't look too good for old Bill Gaines. It didn't look too good for comic books as a medium. It's very, very, it was on a precipice, the whole format there. That's when the publishers came together and formed the CCA, the Comics Code Authority. And yeah, they basically it's a self-governing thing where each comic book, they kind of run it through their own self-created set of criteria for, is this okay to send to distributors? And yeah, that included a whole bunch of pretty whack-ass rules as far as like what can't be shown in comic books. Whereas, you know, I think we discussed that the better mode of restricting certain content from little kids would have been just, you know, some kind of I don't know, separate them from the rest of the comics or something like that. But I mean, I guess they didn't want to think like that then. So yeah, and you end up with the Comics Code Authority, Bill Gaines being one of the people involved there, but he was seen by the others as basically, this is your fault, man. Like, and not only that, but it seems like, based on what we know, that the other publishers involved kind of saw an opportunity there in the capitalist sense, right? Because well, here's this guy, he's already got a target on him, you know, his publishing company. We might as well just kind of use that to our advantage. And they definitely started doing that.
And he was, before all of this, kind of the 100-pound or the 1,000-pound gorilla as far as the industry went at that point.
Yep. So, and then we talked about one of the coolest stories I've ever heard, honestly, like in any context, but I mean, on this podcast for sure, but really it's just, I love it. The story of Judgment Day and that comic book story in an EC comic, their last published comic, in fact. If you missed that, go back and watch it. Actually, probably should just kind of clip that and upload it on its own because it's worth it.
Yeah, the whole comic is actually available for free online.
It is? Did we discover that already? Or
We did.
I not?
Yes.
Okay. I forgot then.
I will try and find it. We can pop a link to it, and we'll put that up for folk.
But it's a piece of history, and it's you know, me being, and Morgan as well, and you know, I think Ryan to some degree, we're all more or less into comics, and we know a few things about comics and stuff like that. And I don't think any of us had heard of that before we kind of looked into this. So, but it's the kind of story that should be known more, not just the story of in the comic itself, which is good from what I can tell, but also the meta story of that comic is awesome, and it's a win for his Lord and Savior Bill Gaines. That he got this comic published whenever the CCA administrator did not want to, seemingly for racist reasons, probably for racist reasons. And then he managed to, he basically just, you know, wasn't going to have it. Bill Gaines, he fucking pitched a fit, you know, stood his ground, and he won the day. The comic was published without any changes. But that was also the last comic EC published. But that wasn't the last thing that EC published, because they pivoted to magazines. In particular, one you might have heard of called Mad Magazine. which, I think that's pretty much where we left off, I believe, is like
right.
this
Is that we
distinction between what do you remember I don't have the measurements of a magazine versus a comic.
Yeah.
Right?
So as far as the comics code was concerned, the difference between a magazine and a comic book was entirely based on the dimensions of the book, which is wild.
Yeah, because look, Marvel at that time as well. Marvel started doing some magazine style comic books. Like that's where Shang-Chi, his first series, I believe, was in a magazine format, and it did not have to be rated by the Comics Code Authority, but it was still sold.
From what I understand, it wasn't produced as a comic book in its own right. It was I don't know exactly what you'd call it, but it was a strip, a full length strip in a kung fu magazine.
Right.
So it had the comic book in there along with articles and stories about kung fu, very similar to Marvel Comics early days as Timely, when they did like stories with drawings as opposed to comics.
Yeah, I mean, but it's just one of many examples that I think we're going to get into here that show the ways that and this is usually the case with these types of panics where there's there's a big inorganic, impulsive, irrational, and so on, the eyes and whatnot, and then the consequence of that tends to be that there are some hilarious ways, really, that you can get around those restrictions that are just kind of slapped in place, right?
It falls apart pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, and from a British perspective, because I did look into this to see if we had any similar rules, because obviously we didn't have the Comics Code Authority here. The way it worked over here is because Marvel UK just used to reprint Marvel stories from the US, and so there was no size restriction and there was no Comics Code Authority, but it was just governed under our existing obscene publications laws, and so that's how they covered it here. And I don't think there was any particular issue with the horror comics ever specifically, but interestingly, when Marvel UK reprinted Marvel issues, as well as some of the dialogue being localized, they would have to occasionally cover up some of the exposed flesh in some of the comics. It was the editor's duty to sort of go through it and say, oh, we need more clothing on this woman or whatever, which is a weird little thing.
Yeah, that's strange.
But that continued right into the sort of early 80s. Because what I also discovered is that for a brief period of about 2 or 3 years, the editor of Marvel UK was Neil Tennant, the singer from the Pet Shop Boys.
I'm not familiar with them.
Well, they're they're still going, but they're an 80s dance music duo. Their biggest hit in the States, I think, was a cover of Always on My Mind. But yeah, it's also Neil Tennant is where David Tennant got his surname from.
Does that mean his real dad, surname. Or he just took the
name?
No.
He took the name because of acting union rules. Somebody already had his name in the actors union, his surname, so he had to change his surname, and he chose Tennant after Neil Tennant from the Pet Shop Boys.
Interesting. I did post the link in our Discord. It's hosted on the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund's website.
Ah, sweet.
If you wanted to share that in chat.
Yes, I shall. Okay, so just save this for later, guys. Star it. You're gonna want to check this out, seriously.
It's good classic sci-fi comics.
Judgment Day, writer Al Feldstein, artist Joe Orlando. I feel like I've heard the name Joe Orlando just in terms of comics, so I think maybe this isn't the only thing he did that mattered, kind of thing. Yeah, Weird Fantasy number 18, and there it is. This was a point of contention. Such a dramatic and controversial story. Nonetheless, I'll drop the link.
Can you just remind me what year that was as well?
1953.
1953,
So,
right.
It was originally published in 53. Then it was this. So this was a republished thing that became a stink, right? So it had already seen the light of day whenever Bill Gaines wanted to republish it, and that was when they had a problem with it, for reasons that they didn't have, nobody seemed to care about prior.
So when was the republishing? I'm just wondering.
54, 55, or 56.
Right, so not long afterwards, yeah, and a
afterwards.
good decade before Star Trek. That's just where I was wondering, sort of in the timeline of things.
Yeah, before civil rights movement really kicked off, and it's definitely ahead of its time culturally that way.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things that makes it worth. I think there's a perception that people have that moment in time, nothing led into it, right? Just suddenly one day there was a civil rights movement.
Right.
And no, that's not how that goes. There was a lot that led up to that moment in history, and this is a small part of that.
So you're telling me that just in one day in the 60s, black people didn't just go, wait a second, shit's this isn't right.
Yeah, they had been saying it just a little bit longer. See our Jackie Robinson episode for more details.
Indeed. Quality stuff. But I don't want to spoil it for anybody that hasn't read it, really. So, or if you're not familiar with how it goes, you should definitely read it. If you're a science fiction fan, if you're a comic fan, if you're a fan of saying fuck racism, yes.
Because it definitely makes you wonder as well who saw this, who was influenced by reading this issue. Like I said, Star Trek over a decade later sort of introduced the first black sci-fi character to TV.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you have to think that Roddenberry probably read it, right?
You would think so.
I wouldn't be shocked. I'm not going to assert that
did not have a lot of sources for new science fiction back then. So comic books were one of the only ways you could kind of do that.
Right.
So yeah, if you're a big sci-fi head and you're back then and you crave this shit, then you're probably gonna, even if you're not interested in reading comics else, in any other context, at least there's some sci-fi here.
Otherwise, you're waiting for what's coming out in the serial books and stuff.
Yep. So let's see. Yeah, we won't go back over that in case anybody wants to read it and isn't familiar with how it goes. But moving on from the problem of racism and how the Comics Code created that, so a quick recap on that without talking about the story itself. The administrator didn't want to fucking publish it for racist reasons, and basically it's a perfect example of these types of organizations which we talked about as a secondary form of censorship, right? The government essentially said, either you do something about this or we will. And so that's how the Comics Code Authority came to be. But it's only as good as, one, the rules that it puts in place, which were not very good. And in many cases were just so not loosely written, but written in such a way as to kind of be interpreted. Whoever has their hand on the lever of power can kind of take it in a lot of directions, right? And then, so not only with race, but with queerness. And it definitely kind of, this is where I feel like it had maybe more effect in, the social sense than anything else. Because yeah, it's just a lot of stuff that we it basically further cemented what already existed at the time, that like this is just not something you acknowledge. Like that, even in the code itself, it doesn't say gay, it doesn't say homosexual, it doesn't say anything like that. It uses like these fucking
coded language,
but like it's pretty clear what they meant. They're talking
Mhm.
about perversion and shit like that. That like, it's absurd. It's bigoted,
Right.
almost cartoonishly bigoted, but at the time is very much meant to decrease the awareness of anybody being gay or any kind of gay thing existing, especially to kids. And wow, that feels familiar.
It really does. Where have I seen this problem before?
Huh. I don't know. Maybe it'll come to me. But
Wonder what that's about.
In a similar fashion to comics censorship meeting the CCA guidelines, large-scale comic book movies. Let's see. Sorry, I wrote some notes here a long time ago, and now I don't think I know what context I wrote them in.
All good.
So this is definitely a kind of a continuation of the Hays Code, which we talked about a bit, and we will definitely do some episodes on that. And then, which led into the Comics Code, was very much informed by the Hays Code. Hays Code being how they generally restricted movies at the time. That eventually evolved into the MPAA.
And also, as far as the Hays Code had this before, but the Comics Code comes out about the same time as you have not only the Red Scare, but the Lavender Scare, and all of the queers infiltrating government that some weirdos go on about that we'll talk about next month.
Yeah, see, that's honestly, I don't know anything about it, and it feels weird that I don't. But I mean, at the same time, that probably means that they have been pretty successful.
They were, yeah. It's when we talk about McCarthyism, it's a lot of the same people and ideas and stuff, but we only talk about the anti-communist part of it going forward as far as the major historical coverage goes, because we're bad at queer history as a society, just in general.
You know what they say, history is written by the victors, so I guess that tells us a little something there about who's been winning.
I guess it's also shrouded in mystery to a degree, because there were people who would have been queer at the time who kept it secret for their whole lives.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, as far as I'm aware, but perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Morgan, but the sort of justification for the Lavender Scare was not just that they didn't want these people in governmental positions, which I'm sure actually was a part of it, but that if say the Russians found out, then they could be blackmailed.
Right. We've criminalized these people, so we can't let them in government because they could be blackmailed, and we've criminalized them for nothing, for being alive. And then I think also, as far as one thing that has sort of permanently fucked up the ability to tell queer history is that early on in the queer liberation movements, you get the AIDS pandemic, and that wiped out a generation. There was no one to tell the story because a lot of people died, and their deaths were, at least in the U.S. government, celebrated by the Reagan administration.
Cool.
Yeah,
we're a cool country. Cool culture we got here.
Yep.
Well, it wasn't too different over here. I mean, I don't know the exact laws in the US, but obviously homosexuality itself was illegal in this country until the late 60s, 67, sort of 68, I think it was. And still, heavily socially frowned upon after that.
Mhm.
But were there any actual anti-homosexuality laws in the US, or was it again clouded in?
Not to my knowledge, federally. That was a state thing.
Right.
So there could have been federally, but the ones that I am familiar with are all state prohibitions.
Because even after the sort of anti-homosexuality laws were lifted here, there were still anti-sodomy laws in place, but obviously they were unenforceable.
Right. It was primarily anti-sodomy laws rather than specifically saying homosexual, but those laws, gay people aren't the only ones who participate in sodomy.
Well, yeah, that was the thing here. I think it's a weird quirk of our legal system that I think that technically sodomy wasn't made legal here until the late 90s.
Right.
For either for any sort of sexual activity, which is
I remember in Texas it was much the same thing. I remember I think I was in high school and I was just remember it was on the news and it seeing like what are they talking about? Like really? That's something that people that they outlawed at one point? Like, you know what I mean? Like it was fucking bizarre to realize that.
But it was never enforced against heterosexual couples.
No, of course not. I mean, what were they going to do? Like get down in there and with the microscope and just, but which hole are you in there?
Right. It was targeted one way, even though the law was written ostensibly neutrally. You can write a neutral seeming law that isn't really neutral.
Yeah.
And then of course you get these weird situations where you get roommates or
best friends.
Yeah, close friends who
very good
live
friends
together.
Was it a Three's Company? Was it that doesn't have any
yeah, I mean
talking about.
Well, that was sort of the reverse situation.
Right.
The idea that the guy pretended to be gay so he could share a flat with two girls, apartment. So, but the weird thing is, in the UK, of which the Three's Company premise was based, the show in the UK, Man About the House, that facade was dropped after the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
So the first episode begins, he pretends to be gay in order to get the room, and then it's quickly discovered by the ropers that he's not gay. Whereas I think in the US, Three's Company sort of held on to that premise throughout its run, didn't it?
I've never watched it.
Oh.
I defer to Dane on this one.
Well, you were missing out when it comes to just the legendary talents of John Ritter, who... Never mind. I was about to give away something personal about something, and that might have been doxable. Never mind.
Oops. All right. Moving on.
Glad I caught that. Anyway, so I should have. I think I shared these with you guys. So there's several papers, books, essays written on. Queerness and X-Men, and then in superheroes generally, but like mostly X-Men.
Yeah.
And I'll be damned if I had no idea, when I was a kid, I was always been a big X-Men fan. Had no idea to think of it that way, even though I did know that gay people existed, still. But of course now you look at especially Krakoan era of X-Men, which we can't start talking about that. We can't, Morgan.
We can't do it. Don't do it, Dane.
This will become a completely different episode, and I'm okay with that, but we can't do it.
We'll do a post show on Krakoa if we behave ourselves. That can be our treat.
So gay, and it's awesome.
It's so gay.
I
have a friend who they're like, American comics are they're too straight, and I'm like, you gotta try this X-Men out. This is this is very gay.
Yeah, give them that X Factor, which unfortunately did end, but like, man.
Oh, that X Factor is so good.
just a bunch of gay mutants solving murders of mutants that they died, but they're already back.
They're already, yeah.
Like they're helping them solve their murder in some case.
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff.
Well, the funny thing, really, not specifically about the X-Men, although more focused in the X-Men and in comics in general, is that they did appeal to all sort of minority groups.
Yes.
And obviously, there's the allusion to the civil rights movement within the characters.
That was how I understood it as a kid, because that's the most like obvious, even to a pretty dumb Southern kid like myself, that like, okay, I see what they're doing here.
Yeah, well, that was the most sort of obvious parallel, but I guess
you had the legacy virus stuff was very much the AIDS crisis in comic form.
Yeah. And also, the reader implants their own feelings onto it. So if you feel marginalized and you see a group of people being marginalized for being who they are, then and that's why it appeals to sort of nerds as well. That's why people with niche interests gravitate towards it.
Well, in my case, being someone who has always been on the autism spectrum but did not know that until the last several years, there was always something, right, that I was just like, conscious or not, there was just like, I felt like I was not quite the same, and sometimes that was very obvious, and it either it had to be something innate within me, or I just had the worst luck, right? Like, because certain things would happen in my life that I could tell my friends or peers and they don't experience this shit. They have a normal thing going on. You know what I mean? So like in that way, just that vague sense of otherness is what the X-Men appealed to. And I think that's exactly why whenever, comics were at their peak in terms of sales output and units sold, not to say that was a healthy industry, because it was not. X-Men were the thing. That was the shit. That X-Men, and Spider-Man too, but like mainly X-Men made people's careers, made Rob Liefeld's career, made Jim Lee, Claremont. Claremont had been working on it prior to, and he kind of got the X-Men to the point where it went just like to the moon in the early 90s, but still
literally in the story to the moon as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah. Asteroid M, sure.
Doesn't Jean Grey die on the moon? Isn't that?
Well, yeah, that was prior. That was in the 70s, wasn't it? In the 80s?
I thought Claremont was writing that though. I thought that was.
He was.
Yeah,
he was writing. He wrote like 24 years or so. I don't know.
Yeah, Claremont wrote X-Men forever, and he like if they asked him to write an X-Men book tomorrow, he'd probably go back and do it.
Yeah, I think he would, as long as I think that he would, but from what I was reading that interview recently, there's maybe some resentment that things have taken such a drastic departure from, like the way you could tell he saw it as a long-running, overarching narrative that he would kind of lead in the direction it would go a certain way, and like the fact that they've taken so many sharp turns and stuff.
Right.
It's like he's reading it and he said it's good and whatnot, but like at the same time, it's like not what I would have done.
Right. It's not his X-Men. Yeah.
Right.
I get that. Right. Like that's hard. But as far as like the importance of the X-Men and Spider-Man, there's a reason that those were the movies that got made in the early 2000s. Right. Is no one. The reason Iron Man got made is because Marvel had sold the rights to all the popular characters like Spider-Man and the X-Men. And they had sold the rights to the Hulk 1,000 years ago to Universal. But it's like, oh yeah, so what do we have left? Well, we've got the Avengers. No one cares about the Avengers in 2004.
Well, so you can find these on academia.edu. That actually have the book version of this by it's a book called wait, let me make sure I have the actual title and not just the chapter here. It's called The New Mutants. It's the name of Ramzi Fawaz. I probably am saying that like a white guy. but it's the New Mutants, superheroes, and the radical imagination of American comics. And I don't know really how these things operate. I think you can just download it, but like, I paid for it on with an Audible credit on my thing. But it is I've read first few chapters, and it is thick. It is like dense with academic view, but also a view of someone who clearly knows and loves comics. And it's all about superhero comics generally, particularly the Silver Age and then 80s and 90s, and like how they kind of were an unsung part of ushering radical thought through pop culture through those decades, right? Like, so you had Nixon and Reagan, and those guys were generally not very cool guys, and culture became kind of regressive or oppressive to a degree. So there wasn't a lot of radical stuff that was going through mainstream culture. It's definitely underground with punk and other stuff, but like I didn't realize to the degree that comics kind of also played a part in that, like mainstream superhero comics.
Well, what occurs to me is, I wonder if the Comics Code actually helped in a way with this, because I don't think I can think of any examples within the Hays Code where films did this, but comic books, where they couldn't mention certain things, they had to get more creative about how they explored basically the same ideas. And this is something we see in the original Star Trek. They couldn't really tackle the issue of race head on, and so they create these characters as surrogates for people of color. And while sometimes Marvel and DC were a bit lazy about it, like the changing the names by one letter or two letters in order to reflect certain things, I wonder if it did inspire them to actually be more creative about the stories they're telling. So if they can't use drugs specifically or drug use, you have to create a science fiction addiction.
Right. And I definitely think that there is some of that goes on even today still. I think that's just
it's
sort
kind
of
of
how
this ongoing dynamic with politics and mainstream culture and stuff, and then art, because like as a musician and music fan as much as anything else a lot of my life, I've always kind of thought about like, well, some of the best music is kind of rebelling against oppressive culture, contemporary culture at the time, right? And so, but does that mean that like we should hope that there's never or that there's always some oppressive thing happening to culture, and so that we can always have music that's cool, or what? You know what I mean? Like, it's this kind of dynamic that obviously we don't want to oppress anyone just so we can have good music. But what would happen if we had most of the problems worked out in society? Would music become lame? Would it be Limp Bizkit, I guess is what I meant.
Oh goddamn.
Well, there's a weird correlation between economic prosperity and the length of women's skirts. And
weird.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember
when we're more prosperous, or what?
No, I think it's the opposite.
Oh.
Off the top of my head, I think it's skirts get shorter in times of economic strife, and I don't think it's just a question of saving on material.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said about art being a reaction to something.
Right. I mean,
and the more,
art tends to react to the environment it's produced in, right? Like that's where you get a lot of these story influences. You kind of write the world, or in the case of fashion, design accordingly, I guess. You know what people want at some point.
So
yeah, it's sort of a scales of balance. So happiness against fear, I guess, would be the way.
Right.
The things that make you happiest are more popular when you're in the greatest state of fear as a culture.
I just want to read like a bit of an excerpt from this so that you, like, I know this is going to interest you two guys and probably the audience as well. I'm probably going to try and just plan a bunch of content for the next several years based on this book. So just real quick, here's Saul Braun claimed, who wrote for the New York Times in 1971. He claimed that today's superhero is as much about, or as much like his predecessor as today's child is like its parents. In an unprecedented article on the state of American comics back then, Braun wove a story of an industry whose former glory producing jingoistic fantasies of superhuman power in the 1930s and 40s. Right? Superman, Captain America, Shazam. We all know the vibe of those comics had given way to a canny interest in revealing the power structures against which ordinary people and heroes alike struggled following World War II. Quoting a description of a course on comparative comics at Brown University, he wrote, "Now heroes are different. They ponder moral questions, have emotional differences, and are just as neurotic as real people." So that's when you started seeing, Peter Parker was a game-changing character because he's like a nervous little kid, and he's not, whereas before Clark Kent being a goofball was it was performative. Superman would do that so that nobody would know he was Superman. It was to hide how awesome he was. And then you get the Thing, who very much was explicitly like a disfigured, disabled character to a degree. And he couldn't fit in like the rest of the Fantastic Four. And those last few comments about Spider-Man and the Thing, that was me. That's why the words weren't as good.
Well, there's a thing I've heard where DC Comics came out with sort of Batman and Superman, and they were very one-dimensional characters, basically. And then when Stan Lee entered the fray, he added a second dimension, creating sort of more two-dimensional characters. And as time has gone on, other writers that have stood on the shoulders of giants have made comic book characters now much more well-rounded and three-dimensional.
I'd say that's
and I think
accurate.
exactly what the thing you read was saying about the villains that they take on in the early days of comics. They were taking on common criminals, often a lot of the time. The people that sort of the middle classes were fearful of, breaking into your house or whatever and stealing all your stuff, as well as the weird foreigners that might try and invade. And then as time went on, the villains reflected society just as much as the heroes.
I have to quibble with that just a bit, only because I know from my Superman video that I did a couple of years ago now, Superman's very first stories were basically socialist stories. They were, he was, going around beating up, of course he was much less powerful than he is now. I mean, he couldn't even fly really.
But he jumped.
Yeah, he could jump like pretty far. But yeah, he would go beat up a wife beater in one issue. He went to this prison camp where they were it was like a teenager juvenile prison camp, and they were like exploiting them and stuff, and he like just broke these kids out and beat up the warden or whatever, and that was the end of the issue. There was that was it. I beat you up, now these kids are free, issue is over.
Oh, the good old days.
Yeah, it's like, and so even Superman at the very beginning had his he was working class guy. But you're right, especially with Batman.
I've got to be honest, I was thinking more about Batman. I'm not too familiar with
Batman. Absolutely was like,
days,
let me solve the problems of the rich people in Gotham City, and like somebody's trying to steal these jewels. It's like, Batman, don't you have better shit to do?
And I'm sure that is reflected in the creators as well, because the creators of Superman, I know, were very poor even after they had created Superman. Sadly,
up until they died. Yeah.
Yeah, they
And
died
I
poor.
don't know Bob Kane's story other than the more scandalous aspects of him basically stealing a living off other creators. But I would imagine his background probably, he was definitely better compensated than the Superman creators.
Bob Kane was a kind of a piece of shit, from what I understand. In more ways than just that. The Bill Finger thing, which thankfully he eventually got credited. Unfortunately, his first movie credit was Batman vs Superman. But he's getting credited, you know.
Yeah, at least he got it. Better than nothing. And that movie is a movie.
Well, it's a movie, yeah. It's definitely a movie.
I mean, yeah,
it's the most movie of all time.
That's true. I mean, like we're aware of it. I just the reason we're talking about superheroes generally is because superheroes are the thing that has propelled the medium throughout the 20th century and into the 21st. Without the superheroes hitting the way that they did, Western comics were on their way. They had they waxed and waned. Horror comics, well, we don't know what the natural arc of the horror comic might have been because there wasn't a natural end to it, really. But
interestingly,
seem to just not fucking die. Anyway,
interestingly, European comics, continental Europe rather than the UK, all of their comics were about anti-heroes or flat out villains, which is unusual when you consider how well the superheroes were doing in the States. The Italians were basically all of their Italian and French comics, all of their main characters were flat out villains sometimes.
You guys let me know if you can hear any banging in my microphone, because the dryer right outside my apartment door is knocking around out there, so I apologize if you can hear that. I'll just mute myself.
That's fine. I keep muting myself because there's a lot of emergency services vehicles going by, so I'm like, smash the mute, find it. I don't know what exciting thing is going on somewhere, but I hope everyone is okay.
So just to kind of the thing I wanted to get to here in this excerpt is just the reason I wanted to talk about this is it's like paints a picture of how the spirit of what comics were and still are now again, like when we talk about X-Men in the current era, when we talk about that radical bent to early Superman and stuff, how did that survive during the comics code, right? Because if you look at the text of the code, it very much essentially said you can't do any of this. You can't question authority. You can't have someone be, like there were rules, and there were several rules provisions about essentially if anybody ever commits any crime whatsoever, they have to be punished for it. So
they have to be punished by the end of the issue, right? You can't have ongoing stories in the comics code era because the bad guy has to lose by the end of the book.
Yep. So you're essentially saying you can't have a character that, like Harley Quinn, who has, is mentally ill at one point and ends up in an abusive relationship. And part of the cool thing about Harley Quinn is when on the other side of that, when she's not in that relationship and she gains agency and she's like, this is who I am. I'm doing this for myself and so on. And not to mention the queer relationship. You can't have any of that. So like just by virtue of saying those couple of provisions that, it's really limiting the more you think about it.
Well, think of even before that, in terms of the history of Batman, Talia al Ghul.
Yeah.
Like how do you tell a Talia al Ghul story where she kind of gets away at the end of every one of those? Catwoman
is generally never even really seen as a villain anymore in the comics, as far as I can tell. Like she's just, she still does her stealing diamonds, but almost like Batman will show up and kind of be like, "Oh, you're doing that again. You want to have sex?" kind of thing.
Right.
But I'm not going to. That's not allowed.
Yeah. Right.
Well, I wonder how it would have affected, because I can't think of any specific comic book characters certainly that were created after the comics code. But looking back to one of the inspirations for Batman, the Shadow, who is atoning for his sins. Would that character even be allowed, even though he's on the side of good now? He was a villain, so.
Well, and I don't know. I mean, because the Shadow was an old pulp character, so
Yeah,
he
yeah.
predated the comics code.
Yeah. And of
I
course,
don't-
he wasn't a comic character until I think the 70s is when he first
Yeah.
got his first comic. So,
Well, so that gives us an opportunity to talk about how this code eventually started to degrade, just by virtue of society moving forward, culture changing, because like, sorry, my voice going out. God damn it! I talked too long last night. 1 second.
Sure, I'll pick up here. I think the first sort of incident of stupid of note is Marv Wolfman. So if you look at the code, you can't talk about horror monsters because the code was written to get rid of horror comics. So no Dracula, no Frankenstein, no mummies, no zombies, no werewolves, no wolfmen. But you've got a famous comic writer by the name of Marv Wolfman. Well, can we put his name in a comic? And this was a thing the code authority had to go back and forth on. Like, can we publish this guy's name?
Yeah, it was an issue, pun intended. Like, I mean, but don't even look. We don't even have time to get into the tragic fate of Bob Creature the Black Lagoon. Okay, don't have time for it. It's really unfortunate. Sorry, that was the best I could come up with on short notice. I was like trying to think of one you didn't just say, you know?
Yeah.
And that was what
yeah, I was doing exactly the same. Morgan really sort of took the thunder from both of us then by listing all the characters you can have, because I was thinking, oh, I got a great opportunity to mention the forgotten writer Dave Zombie and Steve Dracula.
I'm sorry. You can
No,
tell we
it's
don't
all-
work out our bits in advance.
I'm just happy to know that Ryan and I were on the same page there. So
Good work, team. I'm proud of both of you.
So see, Ryan, I do have the ability to make a joke that's not about poop.
I'm so proud of you.
Me too. Yeah. So Marv Wolfman, that was a whole. That's absurd. There's several examples that we have here that like. There's probably more that are just lost to time even.
Oh, for sure.
You know, but like so. Let me find. Yeah, so back to the magazines. I think I have maybe the measurements here. Maybe I forget if I had them in my notes, but yeah, by
Steve, Bride of Frankenstein was pretty put out. Good work, Archmage.
Okay, so the drugs. You guys know about drugs? Some of them are good. Some of them are not so good.
I wake up every morning and I the first thing I do is I pop open the case and I do my drugs.
Fuck yeah. Based. As long as they're drugs that you are informed on the effects and the effects are positive and so on and so forth.
Oh yeah, they're great. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety, titty skittles.
Yeah. Titty what was hold on. Is that a did I just get introduced to a queer term that for
Are you not familiar with the titty skittles?
No, that's amazing. I've just heard that and now I'm kind of fascinated. Well, consider me groomed. No, yeah. So the code didn't specifically forbid the depiction of drugs initially, but it was generally assumed to fall under the rule about good taste. And goddamn, that phrase, "good taste," when we're talking about restrictions on an art form, pisses me off.
Right.
Just like, who is deciding this? You know, like, you know, harkens back to old Bill Gaines, praise be he himself.
Yes, praise be unto Bill Gaines.
In sitting there, you know, sweating in the Senate, you know, just like, I got to stand for my principles and stuff. And they're like, what about this? Is this in good taste? He's like, yes.
Whose definition of good taste, right?
Yeah.
Like, the gentleman I talk about in the D&D episode, who was fine with the games I was playing with someone my age and that this person enjoyed till they realized they were D&D. Good taste to his spouse was if it was in the Bible. And as I grew up, I realized that they may have never read the Bible because it's a gruesome ass book.
It's really fucking gross, man. Like, you can go to evilbible.com. It lists all of the fun stuff just right there, really easy to find if you ever need to use it for any reason.
The Bible, if it's in the Bible, it's good taste. So if I summon bears to kill people who are harassing me, that's good taste. Got it. Good to know.
So about drugs and about Marvel and about Stan Lee and about the government and the code, all of these things play a part in this story here.
Is that Stan the Man Lee?
The one and the same, yes. You know, he's and maybe almost as legendary as Bill Gaines himself.
Right.
No, like, honestly, I in a better fucking world, Bill Gaines would be mentioned in the same breath as Stan Lee, really. But
yeah. If people knew their history, I think they would be.
The difference is that Stan Lee was a successful capitalist.
That's definitely true.
So, yeah, in 1971, the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare asked Stan Lee for a story about drug abuse. And he agreed, and he wrote The Amazing Spider-Man, number 96 through 98, in May to July 71, in which Spider-Man's friend Harry Osborn overdoses on pills. And as there's an interview there, I think I might actually have that. I can pull that up maybe. With Kevin Smith, where he's like, I didn't know anything about drugs. It's just, he was some pills. They did whatever. You know,
right.
Like, Stan Lee was the best about bullshitting stories that kind of seemed plausible, right?
Right. What do the pills do? It doesn't matter.
Could have been titty Skittles. We don't know.
Yeah. The universe. Harry Osborn is.
So
I'm gonna go die quick, guys. I'll be back.
Since drugs were depicted as unequivocally bad, and you know the government asked for the story, Lee expected it to be fine, but the CCA rejected the story. So that's a fucking dilemma, right?
So the government wanted there to be a comics code, and when the government asked a comic publisher to make a comic, the code that the government wanted said no.
So Stan Lee and his publisher and uncle, nepotism, Martin Goodman, went ahead and ran it without the CCA seal to a positive reception. So that's the first big mainstream. It's a fucking Spider-Man comic, not some one shot, not some, you know, it's a mainline Spider-Man.
Right.
The book ran without the CCA label in 1971, and that was really probably just, you know, it didn't come immediately, but it was a crack in the foundation there.
And it was one that, after the success of it, DC followed up with the Speedy story where he gets addicted to drugs in Green Lantern, Green Arrow.
Yeah, I should pull those up because, like, that I've never read that book. I should get the omnibus. I see that they sell it, and it's not that expensive.
It's an interesting piece of comics history.
I mean,
that's also where John Stewart is first introduced.
When you've got a character called Speedy, it seems kind of normative determinism, though, doesn't it?
Ironically, I think he gets onto heroin.
Yeah, he does.
Which is not Speedy, from what I understand.
Speedy slows down. That's the problem.
That's what's like. You're nothing like what you're not Speedy at all. You're very slow, actually. It bothers me. This is an intervention.
This is what happens when you mix uppers and downers.
It's actually, I do know that when you mix was it heroin and cocaine, it gets called a speedball.
There you go.
Which, you know, there's a character named that too. But
there is.
That's true. Yeah. Wow. I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
So this is the one. This is very much a response to, you know, a little bit cynical on their part, but of course they're making comics, and it's like if you're gonna do a cynical go like Marvel had success with that, let's do our own. Doing it about drugs being generally dangerous is not the worst thing, you know. I would say this is honestly more responsible because I think it is specific about what drug it's talking about than just.
And to be fair, they did pick the worst one as well. It's not like they're sort of he gets
It's
hooked
not
on marijuana.
Yeah,
Right.
it's not reefer madness. It's fucking heroin.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like Stan Lee's, though. I mean, now he was just doing the best he could at the time. But like, it's technically not so responsible to be like, here, just drugs are bad. Well, I don't know which ones, whichever fucking drugs, they're terrible.
Although perhaps he did predict the opioid crisis, so perhaps if more people had paid attention to that,
Yeah. Oh, I mean, so what I think from what I remember, Harry Osborn ends up like there's a whole hallucination scene. So like it's more in the way it's depicted, it's almost like he's taking a bunch of acid. But then he ends up, I think, going up onto a roof and trying to jump off, thinking he can fly or something along those lines. So like that is very much more an acid LSD type story. But yeah, nonetheless. Insert drugs here, right? Kind of like X-Men. Insert, oppressed category here.
Right.
But yeah, it's a pretty iconic artwork there. I remember seeing it as a kid and being like, "Whoa, what?"
Yeah, this book was a team up book because the idea that they had was you were going to have the conservative space cop Hal Jordan and the socialist Robin Hood Green Arrow Oliver Queen team up and go across America and experience social issues.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, this is a good opportunity, kind of tangential thing here. Don't want to get out too off on this, but it is an opportunity to mention our muse, our inspiration for the podcast.
Bill Gaines.
Even better cover. So I'm going to say his name. Even better cover. I remember he was talking on Twitter one time about how what happened to conservative characters? We used to have conservative characters like Hal Jordan's a conservative, and now they don't really write any conservative characters. It's like
Hal Jordan is still the face of Green Lantern.
Well, I mean, I don't know if he is aware of what he's saying and how the context of this but like a conservative in the sense that of Hal Jordan would be perfectly fine. In fact, a lot of characters probably just technically fit that if they're not, that exist now. But conflating what he is, what Ethan is, and what a MAGA is with Hal Jordan type conservatism is fucking insane.
Right.
It is nothing like that. And I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, like Batwoman, despite being a lesbian, is certainly more conservative than the average character. Military background, sort of that temperament.
So yeah, that was also a successful book.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
And that was this. The first one sort of primed it, and the second one sort of like the first one you sort of take the chisel and you put a crack in the wall, and now with the second one you've really begun to divide it.
So important to note is that that Spider-Man story was from May to July 71. Green Lantern Green Arrow was September 71, and it had the comics code on it.
Right.
So just in that space of time, they were like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine."
That's right. Suddenly it became fine.
It's kind of interesting when you think about it. That's literally like a few months moment in time that we can look back and see when cultural, kind of acceptance on a specific thing relaxed right there,
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And it's also interesting to note that this is pre-Watergate. So this is really before public trust in the government had taken a big knock. So
right.
Speaking of which, I was hoping that new Watergate show was going to be a comedy. I assumed it was going to be on HBO. I started watching it, and it is, thankfully. And like the first scene tells me something I had no idea before, that apparently there were like 5 total attempts to break in.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I just thought it was just, like, okay,
I didn't know it was 5, but I knew it was more than one.
Like if it's anything close to what they depicted, I recognize they might be doing a little, dramatic or comedic effect, but like it seems pretty buffoonish. Their attempts, like how they didn't have the right tools and stuff, and they like show up with a guy and he's like, "Oh, I don't have the right tools for this door."
Well, yeah, because it was just hacks. It wasn't like they hired actual burgles to burgle the place.
Right. But what were you going to say?
Not
Ryan,
only
I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, I'd finished with that. Not only was it buffoonish, but people really overestimate how skillful like thieves are based on film and TV. Most thieves just smash the door in.
Yeah,
they don't lockpick. They don't. They're not clever. They take chances.
And then also just on that, man, what a quaint time when that was the shady shit your government was getting up to, right? I mean, obviously there was other shady shit going on.
Yeah, I was gonna say
dude, he's there's a lot of N-words and stuff. He's a big piece of shit. But just like talking about like the administration, the presidential administration doing crimes, or like when you think about Trump and all that madness and the decency, oddly, of Nixon to go, you know what? I don't want to be impeached. I'm going to go ahead and resign. I have some sense of shame, right?
So actually around the same time, there was a Supreme Court justice who had like done a land deal or something, got several $1,000s for someone who then ended up before the court, and he resigned from the court. It's like, man, wouldn't that be nice?
Instead of you got what's his name? Who
I mean, it's Thomas, and now they found Justice Roberts' his wife has been involved in some stuff.
Jesus Christ. Fucked. Sorry, I don't want.
Someone paid off Kavanaugh's credit card debts, and someone bought one of the other ones. Like, he was trying to sell land forever. He had this piece of land he was trying to get rid of in Colorado and couldn't sell it. And then he got on the court, and then suddenly someone bought it, and it was a law firm that ended up before the court a lot. And it was just like, Jesus Christ.
But I mean, thankfully, none of that sounds as utterly cartoonish villain as the shit that Clarence Thomas was up to.
Oh yeah, Clarence Thomas,
the guy with the Nazi memorabilia fucking museum in his home. Like, come the fuck on, man.
Yeah,
come the fuck on. And then his wife's all into QAnon, and like, oh wow, what a country. Anyway, moving on. We're gonna have to do that QAnon series of episodes at some point. So in the anthology book House of Secrets number 83, written by this is the Marv Wolfman thing. You got to that before I got to it in my notes. Never mind. All right, so the power did I step on somebody talking? Sorry.
Oh, I just said sorry.
No. Power of suggestion. So you guys know in the Dark Knight movie, it seems way more visually violent, like visibly violent and gory than it is at all. So like the Joker, there's this one scene in particular that stands out to me when he's got the knife in the guy's mouth
at the party.
No, this is before the party. This is whenever he pretends he's in a body bag. Some dudes pretend that they caught him and they killed him or whatever, and they're bringing him to the mob guy. And he's really alive, and he's in the body bag, and he sits up and he puts the blade in the guy's mouth, and that's when he goes, "Why he's so serious?" And then he just like kind of you see him move his arm really fast, like and it cuts, but you don't see anything. You don't see a drop of blood, any kind of wound or anything, but you fucking feel like you did.
Right, you flinch it.
It's like you in a way, if you aren't kind of being conscious of it, you might actually think you did see him cut his mouth open or whatever.
And I think that the pencil scene is just in that same bit, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And you don't see anything. He puts the pencil in the table, and you see him push the guy's head down, and you hear the noise, but you don't see the graphicness of it.
You did not see it.
And this goes back all the way to Psycho in the early 60s as well, where people were convinced that they not only saw Janet Leigh naked, but they saw her get stabbed. And if you watch that scene, you don't see, well, you see her naked, but you don't see any sexual bits.
Right.
You don't see any graphic nudity. You see her stomach and her arms.
True. You know, the music
and
and as well in Psycho, both in cases, the music, all of those things form a picture. They make our minds think that they're experiencing something visually that they're not. And so, and this is kind of how this plays out in comic books. It's a little bit the same, but also different. So, you guys ever heard of fridging?
Yep.
Yes.
Chat? I know you guys have. Just want to, kind of engage the audience here.
Sure.
You ever heard of fridging? When a woman is fridged, it's just always in context of a woman being fridged. Most recent example that I can think of in like a mainstream comic book type movie, though they did it knowingly and then corrected it at the end, was Deadpool 2.
Yeah. I would say Gamora in Infinity War.
Do you think that's... See, I think I would maybe argue about that. We don't need to do that now, but like...
We don't need to, but I think it's in the realm.
I think that it has, because it's not like it inspires the hero to do the right thing. He fucks up. Like, he really...
That's true. The hero, that's fair.
And it's not intended to incite that.
No.
It's not done for revenge.
But she's just killed
the hero.
to advance Thanos' character, right? Like it's not.
Well, I mean, but it's not this. I don't think that's the same thing necessarily.
No, I think
that almost imply that you can never kill a woman in a thing if it's got something to do with the.
Yeah,
you got to draw a line somewhere. I think
that's fair. That's fair. I will say the Deadpool 2 example is
yes.
Yeah, perfect.
Straight up bridging. So, if you don't know where that came from, we're about to learn. It's a fun story. It involves a very positive, legendary figure in comic books, and maybe she deserves her own episode or something sometime. But she definitely has had a lot of forced adversity against her for fun.
Oh, yeah.
Gail Simone coined the term women in refrigerators, which I believe that was the name of her blog, too. Right? Green Lantern number 54, August 1994. Which is an issue that I had. I bought it off the fucking at the grocery store. I had never bought. I don't even know if I'd read a Green Lantern book before that. But I saw here's this new Green Lantern, and that felt like an opportunity for me. I didn't need to know this other guy, and he looked
still
cool.
don't.
He still don't. And so it was Kyle Rayner's first issue, and I got it. And I don't remember what my reaction was to this moment or anything, but like. See. So it's the infamous scene in which the titular hero returns home to find. I'm sorry. This is actually not the debut issue.
No, it's a few issues into the run.
He returns home and finds his girlfriend dismembered by a supervillain and stuffed into the refrigerator.
Except.
Yep. So. She wasn't really dismembered.
No, she was not.
The story goes that basically the fridge was going to be open, and that's how the artist had originally drawn it, where it was like you just see the woman's just dead in there. There's not like a bunch of gore or anything. Her name was the character was Alex DeWitt, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Not any gore or whatever. Just she's in the fridge. You can tell she's dead in the fridge. But the editor said, well, you can't just show that. You can't just show a dead woman in a refrigerator. That's horrifying. You need to shut the door, so you make sure you can't see in there. So he redraws it or draws it to where the door is shut and you can't really see except maybe a little bit hanging out there. And that led readers to think that they're seeing a dismembered character in the refrigerator. And are they not? Who knows? It's, it's almost like what is it? Schrodinger's Alex.
Schrodinger's corpse.
Well, I think isn't this sort of as well an example of the Mandela effect?
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
Where people are convinced of something that isn't true based on a memory they created of it. And then they can go back and check, and it's not that. And they think, some people think that there's some sinister supernatural force conspiring against them to change the original. Whereas I would hope that more sensible folk would be realizing they've just forgotten.
Your brain's meat computer has some errors in it. It's fine.
Yep.
So I'm opening up another couple of sources here that I feel like I'm.
Well, while you're doing that, I'll address Chandler Burke's point in chat, which is a response to, Psycho was the first film to show a flushing toilet, possibly the first film to show a toilet, although I wouldn't say 100% on that, but it's certainly the first to show a flushing toilet.
Well, you know how toilets are. How you don't want to groom your children into knowing about pooping.
Hey, you make that joke, but like, if tomorrow the fine losers at the Daily Wire were trying to convince their audiences that toilets were woke, I would just be like, "Oh, must be Monday."
Well, what's funny about that though is that remains a sort of a weird inconsistency in certain sort of TV programs, more so, that nobody ever goes to the toilet.
Right.
True.
For a long time, nobody went. I mean, you look at a show like 24.
Well, okay,
no
look.
No one's gonna take a crap in 24.
Well, it's also like you know about screenwriting though. It's the Chekhov's gun. It's like Chekhov's toilet. And unless somebody's going to take a shit in that toilet later on, you don't need to see it, right?
That's true.
Fair.
Yeah.
But I mean,
bird.
if it has to do with the plot, like in Dumb and Dumber, there's a brilliantly executed plot point about is it Harry? Is that the one?
Yeah.
Who ends up being fed some X-Lax, and he has a very challenging character moment in the bathroom. Sorry, it's best. I wish I had a drop for that right now so that I could just drop it. And
it's almost like this is some sort of obsession of yours.
It really is. It really. Well, look, guys. Poop is funny. Okay, poop is funny. It's really what it is I'm reaching for it today because I am kind of just
in that mood.
I'm out of it and like just kind of checked out to a degree, and also don't give a fuck and just like, so
Fair.
I know that if I reach for a poop joke, at least I'll laugh.
Right. So what I'm hearing, tell me if I'm wrong, is that despite being in a shitty mood, you still want to do your duty to entertain your audience.
Exactly. But also, hey, Ryan, wait, hold on. What are you talking about, dude? You're the one that wanted to address the comment about toilets in movies. I just took
That's true. I did.
a fucking logical, conclude. I'm like actually trying to engage with that on a level of like, well, let's talk about how toilets play a role in story and film, and like,
No,
why
that's
would we-
fair.
So screw you.
Let's just flush this tangent away.
Yeah,
and get
trying to
back
make trying to make me into some kind of turd burglar or something.
I do still think it's weird that he never goes for a pee in 24, though. I mean, it takes
is a
place
little
over
weird.
24 hours. And
true.
Does he do
Well,
it?
yeah.
Does he do it during the commercial breaks?
He must. Well, that's why everyone's so angry in that show, is they're just constipated.
But yeah, what you don't realize is that just below frame, he's like peeing when he has to, and that's why they look so terrified when he's standing there with his gun to him. He's like, "You got to tell me where the bomb is," and he's just like, "Oh my god, wow!" Because he's seeing him just like peeing right on his foot. Anyway, and I still didn't find my fucking sources because you distract me with your accusations and your bullshit.
All right, screen wipe.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be one in the edit for sure.
Yeah, we got to flush this one down.
God damn, where's this?
I'm so sorry. Organized
right.
chaos. Don't encourage us. I'm trying to keep us on best behavior so we can talk about X-Men more.
Don't
later.
encourage Ryan to like use his posh Britishness to like make me out to be some kind of miscreant, because that's what he's doing here, right?
I mean, that you are a miscreant is independent of Ryan's accent.
Yeah. Anyway, what the hell was I looking for even?
Forced adversity is a wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
Okay, here we go. So, let's see. No victorious villains, no werewolves and vampires, no crooked or incompetent cops. That was one. I think we mentioned it when mentioning the provisions, but that is something that's, like, how did Batman even exist, right? Actually, when you think about what Batman was like in that era, especially in the 50s, 60s. It was just all camp.
Right, it was all camp.
You can't have a Gotham that's overrun with crime.
No.
Because the cops have to be good at everything. They got to be good cops doing their job. They're doing great job, boys. No reason for Batman. He might as well go wear a pink bat suit and dance with the gorilla or whatever the
He's
fuck.
gonna dance the Batusi.
Well, that was like the giant typewriter being a method of killing as well, wasn't it?
Right.
Who's the artist or the writer of? Oh, that's going to annoy me.
That yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about sex, baby. When it came time to draft a comics code, embargoing virtually all sexual content must have seemed like a no-brainer. Of course, this was the 50s, so like, yeah, of course.
They hadn't invented sex that was pleasurable yet.
Right. They didn't even know what's the meaning of the word having, I don't know. Anyway, admittedly, you could kind of imply sex, but crucially, it couldn't be illicit. And the CCA's definition of what constituted illicit was unsurprisingly old-fashioned. As recently as 1999, Devin Grayson complained about being forced to change the script to Titans number 9 so that unmarried characters Donna Troy and Arsenal weren't in bed together. Because they're not married. So, yeah. 1999.
I mean, that seems very regressive, considering that, I mean, around this era in sort of TV land, sitcoms had to show couples in separate beds, and you weren't allowed to say the word pregnant.
I mean, NYPD Blue was showing, what's his name?
Sipowicz?
Yeah, showing his ass on TV at that point, So, let's see. What's more ridiculous is that Grayson was likewise forbidden from portraying Donna as having enjoyed her amorous encounter, even though she's over 18 and it was entirely consensual. So, like, I guess that means that she couldn't just be looking kind of blissed out and relaxed, and she they just had to be sitting there all rigid and
right.
Crazy.
You know what this whole like bed discussion reminds me of is how in TV shows, when there's a heterosexual couple in bed, the guy's chest is exposed, but the sheet is pulled up to her like chin.
Yes.
Like,
every single time.
Every time. And like, who is like that in bed? That's weird.
I mean, yeah, it is the kind of thing that when you see it, I mean, not that you're having a whole lot of immersive experience in a sitcom, but still, it definitely calls attention to itself.
And it seems to be a convention to indicate that they've had sex, because if they both got the sheet covering them, obviously that means they couldn't have had sex. Or if she's put on a bra to sleep in, they couldn't have
really
had sex.
Uncomfortable. Sleeping in a bra.
No,
oh God.
No, you can get sleeping bras.
That's true, but still.
I do want to highlight, based on that there are some shows like that have been on FX, and like Battlestar Galactica did it once or twice too, and like where they kind of take in the opposite direction. They can't show the nipple, but they will very, very carefully. The cinematography, the editing, and everything is done in such a way that you almost feel like you're about to see it, right? And then it's like cuts away, and it's like, wow, well, very, very well done, very well done.
Battlestar Galactica will get to that point, and then they will show you the Cylon lady's glowing spine,
and then they'll never mention it again.
Then they will never mention it again.
They did it twice in the first season, and it was never addressed.
Yep.
If they'd been really clever, they could have given her like glowing nipples as well. And that would have.
Hey, we know they're working on another version, so maybe cross your fingers, and we're gonna get those fracking glowing nipples.
So I had a buddy back when that was first airing, at the game store I was going to, who insisted that the original Battlestar Galactica was better than. This was when the miniseries came out for the reboot. That was better than the miniseries. And it's just like, you're crazy, because I had not seen the original until this person was like, you have to watch it. So he brought over, he lent me VHSs that he had acquired somehow, and we watched or I watched the original Battlestar Galactica for I made it a good 90 minutes before I was like, I have seen enough of this show for my lifetime.
It is. Look, there's a lot of fantastic premises and seeds of stuff in the original Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
But it is not. I watched the kind of, I guess it's like a movie premiere kind of thing they did.
Yeah,
and it's all right. I'm like, for the time, it's very obvious they were like, oh, we needed our own Star Wars.
Right. It was very much Star Wars for TV.
And in that regard, it's kind of fortunate that Glenn A. Larson had decent ideas to kind of slot into this Star Wars ripoff.
Right.
But yeah, everything that was good about it, Ronald D. Moore took it and made it fucking awesome.
And again, this goes back
last
to that
season.
sort
of... Don't start. Hey, shut up, Morgan. Don't start with me. I wanna hear it.
Well, again, though, it goes back to that idea of that perceived memory, the sort of Mandela effect, where you only remember the bits of the show that you liked and not all the silliness of it.
Mm-hmm.
The episodes with Lloyd Bridges are really good.
We're going to be doing a series of episodes on things that Morgan doesn't like that are good.
When Morgan is forcing adversity
against season 4 of Battlestar Galactica. Look, it's not perfect. It's not the best season.
I would say the rest of that show is. I would say the rest of that show is very good, and that last season is fine.
I think the ending is worth the kind of rocky earlier parts of the season. I love the ending.
The ending's not bad. No, it's all right. Yeah.
But also, Picard season 3, that's going to be me and Ryan against you on that one, I think.
It is one episode. We disagree on an episode.
Well, we're going to spend several episodes on that one episode, okay? Nonetheless.
So if there's anything else you don't like, now's the time to say it, and we could sort of fill the timetable.
Okay, we're just gonna make August the celebrate Morgan's birthday by dunking on Morgan. I'm down for that. I can be roasted. It'll be fun.
Okay. I mean, now that I think about it, we probably will try and find ways to do an episode of just something goofy like that sometime.
That sounds like a very fun, goofy episode. I would definitely be up for when Morgan forces adversity.
I know you guys probably aren't really. It's always Sunny in Philadelphia fans, but when I say I want to do a forced adversity against you, I'm thinking. And there's an episode called "The Gang Gives Frank an Intervention," and they're like they want they want to do an intervention on Danny DeVito's character because he's drunk all the time and he's just going nuts. And they're like, but they're not worried about him. They're just like, it's really annoying, and so we're gonna do an intervention against him, and the thing you do at him.
We're gonna commit an intervention. How very George W. Bush.
So yeah, anytime I say that in the future, that's the context I'm thinking of. It's an aggressive posture I'm taking against you.
Okay, good to know.
Anyway, so yeah, bypassing the code, we've started to see the cracks form.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to the erosion of the Hays Code, the Comics Code Authority just became more limited over time, and people found ways around it. The 70s and 80s, publishers started to find ways to avoid the seal of approval altogether. And the big thing that changed, it was just like once this came about, it was history was written. It was only a matter of time.
Right.
You guys know what it was? I know you do, Morgan.
I can't think of anything that immediately springs to mind. Like I said earlier about Watergate, obviously was an erosion of trust within the government, and so it would seem weird not to portray cops as being criminals when it could have been. But I think it's probably a bit later than that.
Yeah, this was in the 70s and mainly the 80s, really. So the 80s came about, and a type of thing that hadn't existed before and is now sadly on its way out was the comic book shop.
Yep.
Direct market. So prior to that, distribution was done through essentially the same way that newspapers and magazines often buy the exact same distribution companies. Now you could just literally sell them directly to a comic book shop owner, and they didn't have to. They could do whatever they wanted. They're buying them. Those are the owners' comic books now. They can sell them however they want to.
And at the same time, we see the rise of independent comics, I guess, as well.
Yep.
Yep.
We're getting there.
I mean,
It's all stems from that for sure. The comics industry has basically never been not in flux in some pretty significant ways. Maybe for a few years here and there, things are kind of like, oh, this is how it is. So like that's when we look at these Comicsgate type guys and the ways that they manipulate that fact to act as if that it's supposed to be some stagnant thing all the time. The way the industry operates, it betrays the history of the industry.
Well, I think of the first places, to touch on something that comic skaters like to touch on, the first places I bought anime and manga were comic shops.
Yep.
That was where you went. And when I started, a lot of that was like, sure, there were official releases, but like there was a lot of sketchy VHSs.
True.
Of
yeah, that is true.
Overseas content, and it was a different time for sure. But like that's where that got started. You weren't buying manga like today, where you go to Barnes and Noble and there's 4 or 5 shelves of manga. It was, maybe a shelf or 2 at your comic shop. I think an interesting thing I wanted to touch on while we're sort of in the 80s and in the late 70s is going back to the code where you can't depict anyone in an authority position as the bad guy. You get the Nomad story with Steve Rogers and all the corruption in the U.S. government.
Yeah, he quit being Captain America because of Nixon, basically. Right?
Yeah, the editorial made that not Nixon, but they never revealed who it was. I believe it was just somebody in the government.
Well, prior to that, though, I think that it was established that the president was Nixon.
Right.
So it's just they didn't say that it was him in that instance, but like if you're assuming continuity, then yeah.
Yeah, right. It's heavily implied, but not like directly stated in that issue, in the one issue where it sort of comes to a head.
Because I know the only president that they literally refused to say was the president in Marvel Comics was Trump.
Yeah.
It was just like kind of some nondescript older white dude, I think,
Right. Well, and I think that... One second.
Sure. Time's up.
Well, yeah,
Sorry,
just to say about the...
I kind of think that's cowardly, not going to lie.
What?
Not using, like, when they've done that for so long, where the president is whoever the president is at the time of the book is published. I think that was a little cowardly.
I can really honestly see both arguments for it. Like I see it, I can see it as cowardly, but I can also see it as like just a form of rebellion. As like we don't even recognize your legitimacy as a president the way that we have even Nixon, right? Like or even Bush Jr. Like,
but at the same time, they told so many stories like Secret Empire and stuff that you're talking around the issue, right? Like you really want it to be Trump.
But wait, the thing is though, Secret Empire was written and planned out, and most of it, I think all of it maybe, came out before he was president.
Oh, really?
Yep, that's very. It's easy to not realize because it was like within the same year or so. Like, but yeah, it was all that was written, definitely inspired by the rise in fashion in the U.S. It was inspired by Trump, almost certainly to a degree, but it was like written in that state of mind pre, November election day 2016 or whatever, when we all realized, oh, this is actually happening.
Right.
When everybody before that, it was like, this guy's not gonna be president. Come on, and that's how it was written. So like, it felt like a safe thing to write. Like, whoa, we got to look out because not this guy, but this could actually happen.
I guess, yeah, the build-up, because the first issue would have been April 2017. So, yeah, the build-up and how event comics go and the planning, yeah, that was
Yeah, the Hail Hydra moment was in
2016 then, yeah.
Yeah, in mid-summer 2016, I think. So yeah, it was already well in the works. It all been planned out.
Right.
I don't know how much of it, if any, was changed or anything like that, but nonetheless, I don't know. You know, I'm not saying that it was flawless execution of dealing with that, but it has to be kind of a weird thing to be a major corporation that is now the most popular brand in the world as far as entertainment, and then you're writing a story that at one point feels like this is safe, and it's comments on what's going on, but it's not going to really have an effect. And then you start seeing your comics
story
being
come true
more and more by a certain group of people around that time. Like, I don't know. I would imagine that editorials kind of not sure how to go on certain things sometimes.
Yeah, and event comics are already kind of, you have to have that planned out well in advance. You've got to have, I mean, usually, before you start your tie-in stuff, you have to know where you're ending.
And I will make the case. In fact, I could probably make a case of doing an episode on Secret Empire at some point.
Yeah, that's actually a really good one we could talk about. I think as a lot of comics discourse around that, and a lot of bad faith arguments, and a lot of people who had thoughts on the book based on panels shared.
And a lot of not just, if there's a misunderstanding of what happens in comics was a lot of it, but then also just fascism, because I saw people saying that Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, they would be so upset because they were Jewish and blah blah. And it's like, I don't think so. Honestly, if they saw the whole story play out and what the intention is and what it ultimately says, they probably think it was fucking awesome.
Right. And it's one of those things that we've seen out of Comicsgate, where if they can't make the argument, they will try to put their argument to the dead's mouth.
But I mean, to a degree, that does kind of have little superficial sense to think, oh, well, these Jewish creators they'd be so upset that their character that was written to be the Nazi smasher is a Nazi himself. That's so dishonorable. And I kind of almost get that. But when you think about it for 5 seconds, that doesn't really hold up.
When you think about Jack Kirby's writing when he was at DC, and how some of that's a little pointed with some of the New God stuff, and how he talks about media and characters like G. Gordon Godfrey, I feel like he would be on board for this.
Yeah, probably.
It's also not about where the story starts; it's about where it ends. I mean,
right?
Exactly.
Because there's all this furore about Ms. Marvel being killed off in the Spider-Man issue,
right?
Like
that's coming,
this month, And it's like,
spoiler. No, I mean, it's all over the place, but we shouldn't talk about any of the theories that are going out unless we.
No, I wasn't going to talk about the theories. I was just going to say that I was there. I was there for the death of Superman.
Yeah, look, Jesus Christ! That's one of the things, by the way, that Krakoa and X-Men has done amazing, is that they've made death matter again, oddly, ironically, by making it not matter. There's stakes to it again, in the sense that you have to. You get brought back. It's written into the story now. But then, like, we just had one of the best events Marvel's done in years was Judgment Day, Avengers, X-Men, Eternals. Very fucking good. All about the public finding out that the X-Men now have this resurrection thing. And wait a second, you can resurrect and you're not giving us that kind of, and the Eternals finding out about it, and Druid being like, well, you can't have that. You're a deviant now. We're gonna So
well, even like Sins of Sinister is all about, well, what if someone uses this system to get up to some fuckery?
He got up some. I have not read the entirety. I've read the first issue of Dominion or whatever, and then the last one, and so like I know how it starts, how it ends, and a little bit of what goes on in between, and it is fucking bonkers.
It is that. Oh God, it's wild. It is some wild
you end up
shit.
1,000 years in the future, and there's every single body that exists that's still alive is a Sinister.
Almost, yeah.
Like, the character that we know is there's the same character. There's a White Queen and Beast, but it's also Sinister genetically in there.
Right.
And they're all doing their normal type character stuff, but also sinister type shit. It's fucking just a bunch of Sinisters killing each other out in space, and utter insanity.
Yeah, it's
see if
like it's a story you could only tell in comics.
See, if that was me, then one of the characters or one of the people I would bring back from the dead is Jesus. just confirm that he was actually a mutant.
Well, no, they actually, that has been mentioned before, and then again and recently, because one of the characters, so many characters have been fucking made A tier lately, and one of them is what's his name?
Exodus.
Yes, Exodus. He is so cool now, like, and he's still the religious zealot he's always been, and you would think that I would hate that, but he is utterly self-aware and fascinating to fucking read.
I had a conversation with someone about the Krakoan era who thought that they were going to ruin Nightcrawler's character and sort of take him away from his Catholic roots, and I'm like, no, the opposite has happened.
Did you get around to reading Way of X and Legion of X, by the way?
I have started Way of X.
Nice. Yeah. No, they've done both. It's so fucking good. How the Spark, which I have the Spark rules framed on my wall, by the way, because it's awesome. I don't know if you've gotten that far in it yet.
Not yet, no.
Okay, sorry. Well, but he essentially he starts out thinking, I'm going to create a mutant religion. We need one.
Right.
And it doesn't quite go that way. It does, but it doesn't. And but it doesn't take away his Catholic religion. He just kind of builds a new mutant kind of framework around it. It doesn't negate that or anything. Anyway.
Right. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's just a good opportunity for the Hickman Minute.
An interesting dynamic, because we're talking about a team from the 60s that's very much of the time, but they're also one of Marvel's most popular superhero teams, at least for a period they were. So it's they have to do them, but there's not a popular, more modernized adaptation.
Right.
So
well, I mean, the Dan Slott run, the Jonathan Hickman run, the Dan Slott run, both of those are freaking phenomenal, especially the Hickman, which I would be surprised if they didn't pull a substantial amount from that. As far as the way that he made them all about super science and just, Hickman, man, goddamn, I could just do, you guys just leave the stream. I'm going to talk about Jonathan Hickman for 2 hours. Okay. He's amazing. But the way that he can kind of pull this stuff out of, thank you, that he can take characters like the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and then the X-Men especially, and pull out this stuff that's just kind of been there the whole time, but hasn't been focused on, and he's able to kind of modernize it and take it in new directions, and it's fucking awesome. This has been the Jonathan Hickman Minute. Thank you.
Nice. Cut the segment. We're good.
All right.
Welcome back.
It was right there. I had to. I'm sorry.
That's fair. But yeah, so I think that I lost my train of thought completely. Once again, we got into fucking Hickman X-Men. Everybody drink. That's gonna okay. We have a new show drinking game. When Dana or I get on Hickman X-Men, everybody drink.
I mean, it's on Ryan to reel us in. And what did we bring you on for?
I was trying to think of a way back, and I just couldn't. But
sorry.
To bring it back to my idea of making Jesus a mutant, I'm sure that's somebody's brought that up before somewhere.
Yes,
probably.
That was my point of bringing up Exodus. Is that he did say that in a very, very recent comic, Immortal X-Men. It was the issue that's taking place during the Judgment Day event. So that was the end of last year. That's as recent as I've known that it's mentioned. Yeah, he was a mutant. Taking that all the way back to comic shops might be a bit of a stretch, but I was going to ask, because you're talking about the rise of comic shops and how... I can do that, because comic shops, to me, my parents didn't really take me to church, but comic shops were essentially my version of that. So,
well, yeah, but and we're talking about really the rise of independent, self-published in some cases comics, and I guess that they were distributing them partially through comic shops of people they knew.
Mainly through,
yeah. So right back to Robert Crumb, which is early 70s, and I don't know when his sort of peak came, but
how did he distribute his comics prior to the shops? I'm wondering now.
I don't know, because the Fritz the Cat film was 1972, so it must have been just through counterculture places, record shops. would be my guess.
Yeah.
Hippie record shops. But yeah, so he's sort of one of the founding fathers of the independent movement. And then you've got people like Daniel Clowes and others who are all working in this sort of 70s to mid 90s era when, like you said, the comics code was falling apart, and they were shifting units. They were selling a lot of comics for who they were in the independent market. So it's no surprise that Marvel and DC were looking at the figures and saying, like, well, these guys are not bound by the Comics Code Authority.
It kind of just like, I mean, for one thing though, like, because when the Comics Code was enacted, every single child was issued a comic book every morning, basically. You know, every point being that all the kids read comics. That was like so common.
It was ubiquitous.
Yeah, and as time goes on, fewer and fewer did. It became more of a niche thing. It became more of a well, now the nerdiest kids are doing it, and that's whenever in that period was whenever the whole comics are for nerds, you know, and that's a bad thing apparently at some point. No, it was, because I lived through it, believe me.
Right. Yeah.
No. But that's where that all developed, and like, so they were still a very passionate and loyal comic book fans, keeping the industry going. Some of them were kids, but a lot of them were adults, and the industry grew up with them. So that's why you see in the 80s, Dark Knight Rises and or Dark Knight Returns, and then you know, the Punisher was very popular. And that was a character I meant to mention, because if they were going strictly by the code, the Punisher should not have existed as its own.
Oh lordy!
But here he was getting, you know, the reason he was though is because he was killing gangsters and like terrible people, right? So like, in that way, that's a way of getting around the code, because technically the Punisher is just straight up a criminal and a villain in his own right. And
I guess he never wins his own story, because like he kills another bad guy and then has to run away to do it again the next week or month.
And yeah, to I guess the credit, I'm quite certain that there was commentary going on about him being, you know, essentially in a endless kind of trauma that he's reliving.
Right.
You know, but it also made it seem really fucking cool. You remember there was the comic book about his guns?
No,
there was just a comic about Punisher's weapons for a while. Not like they were talking or anything. It was just like, I was Punisher Arsenal or Armory or something like that. Maybe it wasn't many issues, but I remember distinctly there just being a comic book where it's like, here's this gun, here's this gun.
That definitely wasn't at the peak, where I don't think, because it was Warzone, War Journal, and Punisher.
Right. So Lucifer writing Judge Dredd is actually a English comic.
Yep, whole different set of things there.
Yeah, it was not even its own comic. It was part of 2000 AD, which.
So can you explain just briefly, I guess, what the comics landscape at all broadly was like around that period, or do you know? Over there?
Well, in the 70s, that's, as I mentioned earlier, that's when Neil Tennant was briefly editor of Marvel, and it was mostly reprints. And so and I'm not even sure what DC were doing at that time, but Marvel UK was one of the three big publishing companies. The other being confusingly a company called DC Thompson, which did Beano and Dandy comics, which were more comic strip like. But then into the 80s, you see the rise of 2000 AD, which I think started in the 70s, but gained its popularity at roughly the same time the Punisher did, for the same reason. I think they sort of commingled. But you also had, in the late 70s, early 80s, a comic called Viz, which is still a popular sort of satirical comic. So their characters, again, in a similar format to the Beano and the Dandy, which I don't know if there's an American equivalent, but they're basically like 1 or 2 page stories, usually humorous, about characters about sort of like 10 or 12 characters per comic book, just these 1 or 2 page stories. And what Viz did is it basically just did a spoof of that and made the characters very rude. So you had Sid the Sexist was one character, which was a parody of Andy Capp, who was blatant with his sexism and things like that. So Viz 2000 AD, the sort of counterculture comic books were really popular at this sort of era.
Yeah, you had a lot of rock star kind of, or would-be rock star comic book creators coming up at that period.
Yeah, well, that's the time Alan Moore started with Marvel UK, but had gone to America by that point. But people like Grant Morrison, I think, I want to say Andy Diggle,
Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman was coming up in that era. There's a whole list of people who would later go on to work for Marvel and DC who got their start in 2000 AD particularly.
And also kind of considered like transcendent of the genre, and like they've created works that transcended and became Watchmen and fucking Sandman and
yeah, exactly. And Grant Morrison's work with Arkham Asylum and
Doom Patrol too.
Yes, yeah.
Getting its attention now, definitely. It was more of a like, I didn't really appreciate it or know of it at all. I heard of it and stuff. I just didn't care as a kid, and it was definitely like the not so popular brother of the older brother of X-Men, but just not as popular as the X-Men.
Yeah, it was the like. Now I would think of it as X-Men at home, right? Like, oh, we don't need to go to McDonald's. We have McDonald's at home, and it's just like frozen.
But that's why, honestly, like what they done with the show, if you haven't seen it, it's fucking great.
The show's amazing.
They took it and said, look, we know that, like, they just accepted that, because I mean, it would have been difficult to do a Doom Patrol adaptation post X-Men popularity without it just seeming like a ripoff, despite the fact that it came first, and if anything, Stan Lee might have kind of cribbed a few ideas.
Almost certainly.
So yeah, but the way they've done the show, sadly, I think I don't know if it's going to get any more.
I think it's done.
Yeah,
I think it's come to
Zaslav.
As well.
Yeah, that fucko.
But yeah, I mean, these are the creative people who were working on 2000 AD, which was again this sort of anthology comic, which included Judge Dredd as a character amongst others, which weren't as popular. And you've got writers like Alan Moore worked there, Mark Miller, Grant Morrison, Alan Grant, John Wagner, and writers like Dave Gibbons, Jock, and all these sorts of people.
I don't know so real quick, just before I forget, I'm sorry. I don't know if I did, but if I used the incorrect pronouns for Grant Morrison just now, then I acknowledge that and I will remember.
No, I don't think you did.
Okay.
I don't think you did, because
I couldn't remember if I'd used the pronoun at all for them. So just
no, I don't think you did. No.
Cool.
And I don't think I did either. I hope not. But
if either did, I missed it, and if I may have too, because I know I screwed that up recently.
It's just so easy to forget for some reason with them in particular. I've done it before. I did it in my Superman video, and I had to go back and re-record the bit to get it right.
Oops.
Yeah, it's fine. Don't mind.
It happens. Yep.
Nonetheless.
But yeah, so 2000 AD was a sort of initially a reaction to Dan Dare, which was a sort of a hero comic of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and it was a reaction to Thatcher's Britain, basically, in the same way that a lot of the independent comics in the States were a reaction to Reagan's America.
So let's talk about something uncomfortable just briefly, because otherwise it would become the whole episode. So maybe we should make note of it. But like, I haven't really put a lot of thought into this, and it's kind of hitting me right now, right this minute. How much? So when you talk about the Punisher and how kind of fashy Batman got in with Frank Miller, even if the commentary was about that, which I'd say it probably was, because that was before Frank Miller actually kind of went a little fashy. That's what you're essentially seeing is a comic book characters reacting to culture in the sense that urban crime had become a thing, right?
Well, not specifically with Judge Dredd, because it was always intended to be a satire, in more of in a similar vein to RoboCop. So, unfortunately,
just like Punisher was intended to be a commentary too. But I mean, it kind of me and Judah had a whole freaking stream about this one time. Like how much onus is on Marvel to clarify that this is a commentary on the problems with the justice system, not telling you that this is an ideal situation, right? Because apparently,
and I think Marvel
didn't get the message with the Punisher.
No, I think Marvel did a very bad job of it, because it's sort of that Archie Bunker effect, isn't it? Where you're supposed to laugh at this hideous racist, not agree with him, and I think that was something that Marvel didn't really care about as long as they were selling lots of comics. Whereas I think certainly in the UK, Judge Dredd was always seen to be as, is this what you want? Is this really the future you want?
Right.
Yeah, it's a bit more easy to kind of like see it as a almost a absurdist story whenever you're dealing with the future, like a Judge Dredd.
And as time went on, it became more obvious, because one of the things about Judge Dredd is that he ages normally. There's no sort of comic book aging. So now the character is 40 years older than he was when he was created.
Wow. He's still going now too?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's still being printed.
Well, back to American comics, because we're hitting 2 hours. We could do I imagine if we could find an angle on it, we'll do an episode on that on British comics.
I think what we could do is an issue.
We should just call them issues from now on. Fuck it.
Canon. That's canon now. These are now issues. We could do one on when people don't get that it's satire, like with RoboCop and Judge Dredd. And Judge Dredd makes me think of 40K, because they've shared writers back and forth. And 40K is very much.
Apparently,
Starship Troopers.
Didn't get that. I got that as a kid. I don't know how, but still, apparently they exist. So.
Oh yeah, no, I've. Yep.
Yeah. So, let's see, where are we at? No sexy clothes characters. That's another one. Yeah, they basically just eroded over time.
Right.
It so instead of selling comics to stores and to magazine stands and stuff like that, the distributors that required the code sell them directly to the comic shops, which were by and large, especially as time went on, run by comic book fans, which created the whole comic book man trope from The Simpsons and whatnot. Because that guy's real. There's a lot of that guy, or there was.
Yes. For I would say, like, not every comic shop owner is that guy. I would say, in my experience, maybe 20% of them are, though.
I mean, I'd say that there's like some percentage of that guy in every comic shop owner.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
like they want to, they love to, and look, I'm not complaining, but they would love to just kind of impart their wisdom and it was not, you didn't go to a comic book shop to just grab a comic and pay for it and leave. You would pretty much expect, unless it was really busy, you were going to stand there and you were going to chat for a while.
You're going to chat, right? Yeah, it was not a like in and out experience. You'd talk to the guy, whoever's behind the counter, talk to other people who were in the store. I think the only days that I was ever in and out were Free Comic Book Day. Amusingly, the day you spent the most on comics. Also, if you go to a comic store on Free Comic Book Day and you don't buy comics, you're a bad person and you should feel bad. Because I don't know if this is
free stuff, and a lot of it's really cool.
Those stores, it isn't free from Marvel and DC and from Dark Horse. The stores pay for that stuff. So yeah, make sure on Free Comic Book Day. I know we missed it this year, but like for next year, keep in mind, like, support your local comic shop.
So for me, growing up, like a 7, 8, 9 years old, there wasn't a Free Comic Book Day yet.
No,
but what I had was I was pretty fortunate. I feel like in that I didn't. Yes, I had the the middle-aged, overweight guy. He wasn't nearly as much as a dick as comic book guy in The Simpsons. He was very kind man who his wife also ran the shop with him, and she was for about a year and a half or so my drawing teacher.
Oh wow!
And we had our lessons, me and several other people, right there in the comic shop after close. They'd bring out the tables right there in the middle of the shop, and it was fucking magical moments in my mind. Like, oh, I'm in here after they're closed. This is great. But then, so I have a brother who's 4 years older than me. They had 2 kids, girls that were basically right at the same age. And me and my brother used to just fantasize about marrying the comic book girls so that we could take over the comic book shop. That was my dream. But anyway.
Nerd.
I know. That was like... Really, my life went awry when that didn't start. That didn't go down that path. It was all downhill from there. Nonetheless, so after a while, only 4 publishers remained active, and we could do a whole series on the publishers that rose and fell in this period because there's a lot. There's from Fawcett to Harvey to I mean, I guess there's even more that came along in the 80s and 90s. Now that I think about it, but that was when the real run of publishers taking their shot and most of them failing. But so at this point in what year is this I'm looking at? The early 80s, I think, 90s. So yeah, changes in 1989 was the next big change. Changes in distribution and the resulting rise in the so-called independent publishers led to a push in 1982 for another revision to the code. So that they'd already had one revision where they kind of like updated the language a little bit, So a draft written by a consultant hired by the CMAA was rejected in 1982. And Gladstone, which published Disney comics back then, and Archie, they favored retaining the 1971 code, meaning they wanted to remain more conservative in what they're, allowing and through and stuff. Marvel, too, indicated a willingness to continue under the old code. Not necessarily that they wanted to, but they're like, yeah, we're cool with it. Harvey wanted a new code, but warned against any meaningless liberalization.
I remember that, yeah.
Harvey Comics is just basically like, none of that woke shit.
Right.
What they were saying.
Meaningless
Were they even allowed to publish like Casper by that point?
So I think
surely even a friendly ghost is a ghost.
Right.
Didn't we look into that last time? Wasn't there some kind of weird workaround that allowed that to exist or something?
They found a way to keep making it. I don't remember what it was because we had to do a deep dive into Harvey Comics and Casper the Friendly Ghost.
See, these are the paths we took when we did like 6 hours on this topic the first time.
Yeah, it was longer than 6 hours.
We
it
had
was like
no
2 4-hour
whatsoever.
recordings. And this is
the
going to be 2
only
3
thing
hour
restraining
recordings.
us now is remembering what happened when we had no restraints the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1989, the code. Let me see. In DC Comics indicated that it was considering eliminating the seal of approval from its books entirely. And this was in 82, 89. I think I accidentally wrote 82 when I meant to write 89. So they said that the 71 code was an embarrassment and a hindrance to the creative talent of artists and writers. So DC back then was they were at the tip of the spear in terms of creators' right or creativity. Should be this is a creative medium now. This is not just like a commercial thing to throw at kids and tell them to shut up.
What year was this?
This was, I think, 89.
So yeah, we are talking about the Watchmen DC.
Yes. They had seen a lot of success.
Returns, the first sort of big event comics.
Yeah, DC had seen a great profit in allowing creators to just kind of put an edge to this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell more mature stories and whatnot. Turn these stories on their like Watchmen. Okay, superheroes, but what if they were like real shitty people? Nonetheless, you had DC threatening to just quit entirely. The CMAA drafted a 2-part document at that point that met DC's demands for broad guidelines, the principles of the Comics Code Authority. And really, this was probably like if you want to consider it a gut shot to the code, where it was just going to continue bleeding to death from that point on. That was probably it.
Mm-hmm.
When you're just kind of DC strong arming them into saying, you're going to go ahead. Yeah, if you want to, we'll do your code, but it better just be fucking meaningless.
Right.
But
we are DC fucking Comics, and we just put out Batman. The Batman
we're kind of running the industry right now. Yeah.
Right.
The principles of the Comics Code Authority contain general statements about violence, language, and other areas of concern. And then the second part, editorial guidelines, listed specific rules for each of the content areas. And then the CMAA forbade the release of this internal document to the public. So they knew, essentially they kind of made almost, it seems like they made a choice to go, we're going to go ahead and start killing this thing slowly right now.
Right.
They had to realize that's what was going to happen.
Yeah, I have to imagine. The writing was on the wall at that point, right? They had already Stan Lee had already proven that they were a hindrance, and the industry had found all sorts of workarounds by now. And their continued existence hinged on the industry tolerating it. And that meant being a minimally invasive presence.
It's funny how it does fall, the people falling for and against it, though, completely falls along with their own vested interests. So the ones that were publishing comics that were aimed at younger kids wanted it strictly enforced.
I think that might be right.
That sounds right, yeah.
Sorry.
The Marvel, which were fine with it, were probably okay with it because it was more of a hindrance to DC, who were riding high. So,
right, as their big competitor.
Which goes back to the beginnings with how they fucked over his lord. They sacrificed his lord on the cross of capitalism.
Yep.
Bill Gaines, and because not just because it was easy, because it was at the time to paint it, but because hey, we're gonna make more money if we could take this guy out.
Although also Marvel, no, this is a little bit later that Marvel were in deep financial trouble, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, but before we get there, we're about to get a big Marvel moment right now. In 2001 was the next moment. So from 1989, and then you had, all through that era, you had the comics boom and bust, the speculator boom and the subsequent bust that it definitely crippled and nearly killed the industry for good. Because of people who saw comics as nothing but a monetary value. And thankfully, those people don't exist anymore. Thankfully, they didn't start working for right-wing media organizations and then make their own comic book that has literally no fucking life in it and sell that for ridiculous price. No, sorry.
I was going to talk about how I feel like a lot of people who got into the comic speculator boom and got out in time moved into the Magic the Gathering secondary market, and that's why that's been a capitalist hell pit for the last 30 years.
I see. I don't know much about that. I'd be interested to hear it sometime because, man, it's these people that just see this stuff. It's there's money being spent there. People are valuing it. They're really passionate. Wallets are open.
Well, it roughly coincided with the sort of toy collector boom as well, where everybody was looking at sort of 70s and 80s toys in original packaging, and those prices were going through the roof.
Well, and then also baseball trading cards in general were a big thing. It was basically almost a point in history when collectibles of all things were suddenly seen by a lot of people as valuable, right?
This is Reagan's America.
And the first internet boom, the first and yet another thing where Wall Street has really ruined something by creating this speculators market.
Greed is good,
and right up to date.
Remember, he's the villain in that movie. I love that. Those people like to quote that movie, but
I've never seen it.
No, really, it's actually a really good movie.
I bet.
Oh, he's definitely the villain, but it didn't stop everyone on Wall Street dressing like him, speaking like him,
doing as much cocaine as he does in that movie.
Then we need to remember to talk about him when we talk about characters, right? That
yes,
So
you keep talking. I'm going to start putting an outline together in the Discord.
And if you can remember anything else that we've managed to say, we should do an episode of. So in 2001, this was it. This was like basically you're chopping off a limb or two here. Marvel withdrew from the Comics Code Authority's regulations and designed their own rating system. So that's when you started seeing, and this was Joe Quesadilla had come on as the editor in chief. Joe Quesada. I shouldn't say his beautiful Italian name incorrectly. He made some pretty bold decisions when he came on. He he had gotten his start in creator-owned indie comics, and he'd seen some success, and he was a very business-driven guy, as well as he was the perfect kind of guy, honestly, to kind of be the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, because he valued art, but he also valued the fucking business end of things. And he knew how to kind of generally, he made bold moves. So you had things like telling Wolverine's origin, which I will be getting into pretty soon in a video. And I don't know how many people have heard me. I said it once on stream, but soon I will be having a conversation. It was not originally proposed about Wolverine, just by circumstance, by just fucking happenstance. I will be talking to Paul Jenkins, who wrote Wolverine Origin, about something unrelated to Wolverine. But I'm definitely going to slip in some Wolverine Origin kind of questions that I will then use for my Wolverine video. So, little side thing there.
Origins wasn't a Max title, or was it?
No, it wasn't Max.
Because that was one of that was their extreme. That was their. This is definitely not Comics Code Authority now.
No, but I mean, then what you saw a direct result of no Comics Code was Marvel Knights.
Yes, yeah.
Which Punisher, Daredevil, was it Black Panther? I think.
Was it Moon Knight as well, or
Moon Knight? I think. Yeah, I think
was there a Marvel Knights Spider-Man as well?
I think there was. Yeah, I think maybe it was Reign Marvel Knights.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, that might be what I'm thinking.
You remember Reign? You ever read that?
That's the one with the radioactive cum, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I have.
I liked it when I was like 20 or something. I don't know.
Guilty, Your Honor.
But yeah, he definitely killed Mary Jane with his spider cum. Spider cum, radioactive. You know that song from the
yes, the Aerosmith cover.
That's what they're saying, right? Spider cum. Anyway,
I presume so. Yeah, it was Aerosmith, so probably.
And then from there, there was you had the 2000s were hit or miss for comics in general. There was a lot of what's going to happen, and a lot of trial and error. You saw some of these big decisions that were made editorially had drastic consequences for years to come, such as hey, what if mutants aren't special anymore? We need to really put them at risk again. So let's have Scarlet Witch just kind of wipe them all out except for 198 of them. At that point, there was millions. Now there's 198. And it was an exciting, cool thing at the time, but definitely ran its course and stalled for quite a while until and now we're back to Hickman. So about Jonathan Hickman.
Well, we got the whole Utopia and Hope era.
Yeah,
and then it stalled out again.
No. So in 2000, let's see.
That time Jubilee was a vampire.
Yep. In 2011, Archie Comics and DC Comics were the last two submitting for seals of approval, and then they weren't.
We got to talk about Superman here.
2011, Archie Comics announced they would no longer feature the code. Shortly after, DC, who just in what was it, 89, were like they were ready to be done with this shit. Now they're the last ones out the door. Had announced the same intention, and it was monumental. Gordy, please leave that box alone while I'm doing a podcast. Damn it. What was that? Yeah, DC Comics had announced it, and after 50 years dealing with ridiculous and outdated restrictions in order to get the seal of approval from the CMA, that was it. That's all she wrote. Now all that's left of it is our logo here in the corner.
Yep.
It just seems like it. Sorry, it just seems like it lasted much longer than it should have as well. It really clung on for no reason.
I think it was kind of just like we should probably kind of keep this around just to cover our asses, because you never know when the next moral panic's going to come out, right?
Right.
Like there could have been a moral panic about who knows what, but at least if it did happen, they would have a system in place where they could go, okay, that we're adding that to the code now, right? And it would kind of almost, I imagine, resolve itself quicker without all the mess and the demonizing of the industry that happened the first time. I would think.
Because it certainly feels like from reading the 90s comics that they were rubber stamping anything.
Pretty much, yeah.
Even though, as you know, there's an example or two we're going to look at before we're done that show that there were still some hangups. There was every once in a while some weird thing would become an issue, pun intended.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there was the Kyle Rayner thing in the 90s. There was and then was that Superman issue was what?
Superman's beer. Yep.
2001?
Superman having a beer. That's Action Comics. I have that pulled up because I have a story about that comic. I'm gonna post that in our Discord.
So here,
there it is. You got it. All right, you're ahead of the game.
You see, Action Comics number, it's cut off, I think.
It is Action Comics number 869.
Do you want to tell that story?
Sure, I can tell the story. So, I actually had the original of this comic. It was destroyed in a flood not long after I got it, and I wish I still had it because it's a rare comic.
Let's see if the chat can guess what was wrong with it.
Okay. All right, chat. What's wrong with the comic? This is one of those like kids puzzles where like the pictures are different. Tell me the difference.
And it's the cover. It's not in the comic. It's the cover is the problem.
Cover. Yeah.
The quote unquote problem. You get a no prize if you.
Ooh, we're giving out no prizes
in the legacy of Stan Lee. Yeah.
But this has got to be a Bill Gaines no prize.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. It's much less tasteful, I suppose. That's it. It's the big watch controversy of Action Comics. No. Go ahead, Morgan. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, if you haven't figured it out already, and the comic on the left is the recalled one, and Superman is drinking a beer. So a week later or so, they
won't somebody please think of the children?
So yeah, they had to rush out a new cover where it is edited over with soda pop. The issue is actually one of my favorite Superman stories of all time. It is in the middle of a Brainiac attack. His adopted father, John Kent, dies at the end of this story. And this it's his last day with his dad. And it's a very good story. And one that has stuck with me over the years, and to be like, this book isn't famous because it's a really good comic story. It's famous because it's the one where Superman drank a beer.
Right. And I think we talked about in our recording of it, and and still have those, and it'll probably be good for content in some way, shape, or form in the future, because it was a good conversation. I remember that, about just how absurd it is that an adult man, and his, obviously adult father, who is at this point, when the comic takes place, he's already died, right? It's kind of a flashback. Is that right?
I think he dies in the
issue?
next issue.
Okay. Well, nonetheless, it was, it's a wholesome story, and they're drinking. It's not like they're pounding fucking, brews and going to a titty club or something. They're just drinking a beer, and and that's to the idea that is somehow harmful or offensive to someone or anybody at all and not just wholesome and good, is actually harmful and offensive in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the idea of that being harmful is actually harmful to me.
Right.
It's a human story, ironically.
It's a very human story.
As we know, Superman is a humanoid.
Right, but he's not a human. Those are different things are different.
Yeah. And then you look at his face when you were just telling me you're describing the story, and I'm like, and he dies, and I'm like, look at this old man. God damn, that's a. Aw.
Yeah, it's sad. Amusingly, not long before this is the issue of Cable and Deadpool, where Cable has just come back from the dead, and is a child again, and is like growing up, and him and Deadpool go to a bar in Intercourse, Pennsylvania, and talk, just have a chat for an issue while Cable grows back to adulthood.
Yeah, well, I mean that's all good and normal though, so like that's fine.
Right.
Nothing unusual about that. So, but you can't have a guy drinking a beer.
Can't have a guy drinking a beer. Can't have Superman drinking a beer, or his dad, because they changed the label on both bottles.
It's just bizarre. And like, you know what? Honestly, I don't know that I would have ever really thought about it, what it was they were drinking, at least based on the cover. It's the kind of thing that
you didn't. When so at the comic store I went to, they had like on the counter they had the reprint, and I'm like, wait, that just came out. It's like, oh no, they changed the cover, and I'm like, what the hell did they change? I hadn't noticed. Like, the thought that it was a beer bottle hadn't occurred to my Wisconsinite brain.
Well, of course, no, not you. Not there.
Right.
Like, did Superman have his dick out or something? What's going
right.
on?
What's the problem here?
No, it'd be years before Batman has that issue.
Problem, yeah. Well,
Which, by the way, I do own 2 copies of the original of that.
Oh my!
I actually have a photo of me holding about 9 copies.
You just got your hands all over Batman's dick.
Well, I mean, what it is to me, and when I see it, is because I don't know if you remember that, but like I don't know if you can still sell it for that much, but there was a period when, because that comic came out and immediately made national news, probably global for all I know, and everybody's talking about Batman's dick, and DC immediately was like, this is not what we wanted people to pay attention to, so we're just gonna, in further printings and in digital, we're getting rid of it. And so basically at that moment, that was a real, speculator comic, which is much more rare now, but that one definitely became one whenever they officially say we're not going to print any more like that. And my friend at the time, she, big comic book buyer, she just bought like a shitload of issues. I think even before it was a big deal, pun intended. And so so me in my mind, whenever I see the picture of myself holding several copies, that's like my version of, like my rap photo where I'm holding a stack of Benjamins or whatever, because each one of them could potentially be sold for like $300-400 at one point. Future episodes of the Forced Diversity podcast that don't involve comic books will be much more organized, and we hopefully won't go on as many tangents.
Well, I did have an idea to finish out a trio of comics episodes that we could do for next week.
Yeah.
And I think this is forced adversity that ties into the post-comics code era that we now find ourselves in.
Yeah.
See, in this world, there are 2 types of books: comics and manga. And these are definitely different things.
They're in like they're blocked in a death battle too, right?
They're in an eternal struggle, East versus West.
Tupac and Biggie.
Peanut butter and chocolate. Wait, what?
Nirvana and Pearl Jam.
Oh, that's a fight. That's
the Beatles and Rolling Stone. I don't know.
That may have been one of the issues that my parents got divorced over. Pearl Jam and
Hold on. So are you saying that we're going to do episode on that or what? What do you mean?
On What on comics and manga?
Yeah.
I think we should do an issue on comics, manga, and anime and panics around them.
I agree, and right. Issue. You remember that?
We're on issues now. Yeah, this is. And what that lets us do, Dane, as I thought about this too while I was making this outline. The pre-recorded FAPs from the past year of 2022 can be Forced Adversity Volume 1. And this can be the Ryan era when we add, our superstar British character can be Forced Adversity Volume 2.
Oh, so this is like where we grew up a little bit. We got some class.
Yeah.
And instead of just me making poop jokes, we have a guy that comments about how I make poop jokes.
And how I facepalm through the poop jokes.
Yeah, but the fact is,
Because poop is funny.
Ryan,
your results may vary
and
consult your position
nerd
before
out and
using
make all
poop
these
jokes.
plans without you involved, or what?
No, I'm happy. I'm happy to let you to give you enough rope. It's. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not like the cousin Oliver.
Oh, yeah. I'm trying. What was the character's name in Simpsons? Itchy and Scratchy and
Poochie.
You're not the Poochie, right?
You're not the Poochie. Gina Carano is the Poochie.
I should have said Poochie, but me making a cousin Oliver joke in 2023 doesn't really fly unless there's some.
I mean, that's on brand for you, honestly.
It really is, though. Yeah. I had to think about it for a good, what the fuck is he talking about?
I knew the reference, but it took me,
Yeah, I had to download it from the archives.
So
that's why we love you, Ryan. You bring classy references that lowbrow Dane and memory wiped Morgan don't exactly retain very well.
Well, that's the worst thing. The Simpsons, the Simpsons episode is a joke about that,
right?
And, now people only remember the Simpsons.
Right. Yeah, at the end of the world, it'll be Keith Richards, the cockroaches, and the Simpsons.
So it's not like the legal problems potential of comics went away. In fact, when you don't have a regulatory body, you have people that are going to make some pretty wild decisions with what kind of comics they produce. Because as we touched on, and there's not enough time at all to get into the details of all of the creator-owned comics and just like independent publishers that fucking have sprung up like, manna from the earth. I don't know if that's right.
Manna from heaven.
There we go.
Got you, fam.
But I had said sprung up, so I was trying to stick with.
Fair.
I didn't think it through. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I forgive you. But just this one.
So how do they protect themselves now? How does, because there's definitely still people getting their knickers in a twist over something in a comic book. That happens.
I'm going to guess lawyers and PR firms.
True. But, so like, let's say you're writing a comic. You're one of the people that I know in my audience that work on their own comic, and they suddenly are getting sued by somebody, like getting accused of this or that. They would go to Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, which is an organization specifically, they raise money and they donate their resources, put their resources toward protecting comic book creators. And especially, when you're talking about like these days and people that are going after books about, queer characters that are accessible to teenagers through a library or school or something like that, which obviously that's grooming. It's grooming. Don't be grooming. No. That's the kind of shit that needs legal defense in some cases. And that's what they do. And it's an awesome organization. And it is, independent. It's just people who love comics and also know how to legally defend comic creators from nonsense. So if you ever want to contribute to that worthy cause, and in fact, the thing that I'm going to do now that I remember to contribute to them, and I suggest everybody do it. Let me find it real quick.
Throw them a buck. We're in a period of rising book bannings in schools and libraries, and
Yeah, there has to be a lot of it going on that we could probably maybe do an episode looking into now that I think of it.
Yeah, I mean we've talked about it, we could probably do a whole episode on it. We can work that in. I will put that on our calendar now. We have a
So if you want to give them some money and also, gain a physical thing to own, what better than a Bill Gaines was right shirt? Right?
Because Bill Gaines was right.
He was right.
That's
Absolutely.
canon.
And he was right when he said that this is that is in good taste.
I agree.
And I think
maybe not my good taste or your good taste, but it's in someone's good taste.
And I think you can get all the old DC comics now. I think they've been reprinted in anthology collections.
So here's why I'm going to say it's in good taste, right? Scroll back up to the picture. I'm gonna steel bot this cover. Okay, ready? So if I am freshly chopping off a person's head, the blood isn't going to be black already, right? That is clearly some sort of monstrous ichor from a shapeshifter. He has killed a monster, not a housewife.
I'm convinced. You've got me. You won.
Yay, I won. What did I win?
No prize.
Woohoo!
That's what we give away around here. So what is this?
Certified Bill Gaines, no prize.
So yeah, there's they have stuff like this that I guess goes to them. I'm not sure how they have that organized, but I guess it's like Neil Gaiman signs some copies of this and then they sell it and they get the money. I'm not sure, but glad that they do it. They have similar with Umbrella Academy.
Have either of you read library editions of comic hardcovers?
Yes.
That's
Here's
what
some
got
of the
me started in
nicest
comics.
books. Those are the nicest books.
Mm-hmm.
Just
they're also expensive.
They're very expensive. My friend has his girlfriend bought him a bunch of the Hellboy ones, and just something about having it in that medium versus the floppy or even like a trade paperback is just like you really get the art of the art. So
yeah, that's about all we got for now. I mean, anything else that we touch on, we just kind of go off into a whole new tangent. But I do have one thing that maybe be fun to read.
Sure.
So I happened to go looking for a copy of Seduction of Innocence.
Ooh.
By Mr. Frederick Wortham, who, by the way, Heroes and Villains.
Oh, we got to do Heroes and Villains. Yep.
Just remind me and we'll do that next. But so he was a much more complex figure than I definitely thought as far as I knew of him up until we really started looking into this last year. I always thought of him as just basically the Satan of comic books, this old grouchy bastard who just didn't want kids to have fun. And he managed to convince a bunch of parents that they're having too much fun and make them stop. Pretty simplistic.
Right.
It's not that. But problem is that he can be as progressive elsewhere as he wanted to be by being ignorant and impulsive and irrational and, creating this inorganic kind of panic around this stuff the way that he did. It feeds into the right-wing reactionary kind of impulse to control and limit expression. And so when I went to Amazon.com, that's a little website. I don't recommend using it unless you need to. I don't condemn anyone, but I understand there's disabled people, disability reasons why people need to use it. So just try not to.
Sometimes it's the resource you have to use because that's the capitalist hellscape we live in. Don't beat yourself up over it. But if you don't have to, maybe don't.
One day when I have the money to spend, just to blow, basically, I want to own a copy of Seduction of the Innocents because it's a book that I know I'm going to read and laugh at and think is stupid. It's like one of a kind of book for me. Nonetheless, I looked at some reviews of the book, and most of them, just almost all of them, I think, are just like, oh god, this guy was so misguided and blah blah blah. Like, but one magical review, like all those other reviews, they're like half a star, 1 star, you know.
Right.
One beautiful fucking perfect review is 5 stars, titled "Progressives in Regress." Verified purchase. This book is a must-read that proves liberals never change. Dr. Wortham was a well-known communist progressive. He helped defend the communist spy Ethel Rosenberg and organized with Robeson and Planned Parenthood, among many other communist activities laid out in the introduction, that openly attacked the First Amendment to the Constitution in his book repeatedly. He makes the case that free speech should be abridged for the children, and also proposes more gun control. His criminology theory laid out here refuses to blame individuals for crime and instead passes the buck to society, in quotes, because what is that? That's not a real thing. This book sets up the talking points used today to attack gun ownership, free speech, the freedom of the press, and the criminal justice system for the actions of a sick minority of the population that are violent criminals, disavowing radical individualism and anti-socialism. And I think is he doing echo posting there? Wow.
I guess so.
Wortham explains that everyone should accept responsibility for the actions of others, but no institution should be blamed more than the mass media of the comic book industry. Historically, his tactics worked as he shamed entire nations into successfully banning comic books. This book so blatantly anti-American that even his valid criticism of the contents of the comic books is entirely muted by his unrelenting war to destroy the freedom of the press and speech as laid out. After reading the book, I can say without a doubt that the enemy of free speech and the press has always been the Communist Party, who hide behind the more moderately sounding progressive label.
Imagine having such an ahistorical take.
Dude, and also I don't even know where to begin with this shit. It's magical. I like
kind of magical.
Well, it gives the game away of these sorts of conservative ideals of, oh, I completely believe in free speech and this book is totally anti-free speech, but I do agree with what he says about comic books and they should definitely be banned.
Right. It's
really dense. It's dense with so like it's very much, yeah, like you said, ahistorical, but also he's very clearly looking at this with modern context in mind.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think if you know the history of gun control laws in America, that was a conservative originating issue because it was about taking away weapons from ethnic minorities.
Yep.
Is how that kicks off.
They love guns until it is a minority using one like
right.
that, and they don't want to talk about, they were like, why are you making such a big deal about these mass shootings or whatever? Oh, now a trans person did it. Now it's a big deal.
And that's why for up until that happened recently, for the last couple of years, they were trying to, I should be more specific in my language. There were conservative agitators that were trying to frame trans people for doing mass shootings. And so, but whenever, they always want to make it about that, or it's a radical individual, to borrow a Christian's phrasing there, but it's only about a group when it's a group they don't like.
Yeah. So,
and then also the government that created these hearings based on Wortham's work was the same government that gave us the Red Scare, right? Like This is still that era of politics. We're like this communist worked with radical anti-communists to do a thing. What?
Essentially, you had the government was being it was touching tips with with John Birch Society type shit,
right?
And McCarthyism is all kind of all entwined. Well, I guess John Birch Society wasn't a thing yet, but pretty soon would be based on this era. And it's bizarre. Just honestly, I had read it last time we recorded before, and I was going to bring it up. And when I set it up just now, before I started reading it, I didn't set it up well because I forgot how bonkers it is until I started reading it. I'm like, holy shit, this is all over the place. It's almost like you had, it seems like somebody would have had to sit and think out how absurdly wrong this is. But no, I imagine it just flowed out of them.
But I think this does reflect the sort of the mindset of the people who think like this, in that they fully believe in free speech and all of the other things, but only for them specifically, and people who think like them. And that's not really how it works.
The core of conservative ideology is freedom of consequences for me.
It's you know, and I don't know if it was on this show I mentioned it, but I did read a thing at one point. Oh, I could pull the link up later, listen to you, but like this, it's a Medium article by some guy. I don't even know if he's got any kind of maybe he's a teacher or something, but like it really did kind of crack the fascism perspective for me in a way that I hadn't been able to kind of, you know, I'm pretty good at adopting perspectives that aren't my own when I need to understand it. Fascism, there's a lot about it that I don't like. I can understand how it works all day long. I can understand the methods and the reasons and stuff like that, but like the literal perspective of it sometimes it's like, how can they justify this? And this guy wrote about how fascists tend to you know, and generally reactionaries, I guess you should say, but the end result of a reactionary without any you know limits is a fascist.
They always seem to get there, at least.
So is that he's talked about how it's not that they let me try and think of what do you say. It's not that they want to take rights from you because they they think you don't deserve them, right? It's they want to take rights from you because they think you don't even have the ability to comprehend the rights that you have, much less utilize them in any way worthy of the rights. And like, and he said it way more compelling and like, you know, eloquently than that. And it just kind of like, I don't know, to think about it in that way is oddly new to me. Like, it's not like they're just seeing the rights as the same thing. It's the people. They don't, never mind. I'm not doing it justice, but it's fucking, it's pretty, it was a mind blowing moment for me nonetheless. They just, you know, especially when we're talking about minorities and anybody that isn't, you know, part of their cult, essentially. Like, you're not even a organism that it's almost like, okay, here's what it is. They see themselves as doing people a favor by taking their rights from them. That's what it is. They don't think they're punishing you if they want to take your rights. They're like, look, you just don't even understand what you've got here. These are special and just, you are innately, you're born without the fucking the value, that whatever quality that allows the superior person to fucking, you know, and just trying to get into that mentality even for a moment is interesting and terrifying. And we got to stop these fascists, guys.
It's sort of why they always end up at eugenics, right? Like, yep. It is always, it always gets there eventually, that like these insert group keep popping up naturally. And so we have to do things to make them not pop up. And that doesn't work. That's sort of a lot of period writing on colonialism, is that colonialism is a good thing because we're civilizing these people. That was always the justification for the exploitation and abuse, is that we're bringing them, you know, depending on what era of colonialism and what country, we're bringing them God, we're bringing them industry, etc., etc.
Yep.
It's just about wiping them out, though, at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's
wiping out their identity.
Because on the left, you tend to, it's the natural thing, I think, position to start from, like, thinking, how can they do this? How can they think this is okay to do this to us or to people, right? Like, how are they justifying it? It's like, you're assuming that they're beginning from the position of we're people.
Right.
Like, in the same way that they're people in their mind. And really that kind of gets to the eugenics of it, the the ability to justify fucking atrocities, and increasingly so, we're seeing it happen. You know, yeah,
it's
we're ending on a downer. Cool.
We're ending on a downer.
I guess that's this podcast, though.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna bring it back up, right? We've got 15 seconds before an hour, but we've gotten some really good comics lately. So you know what? That's something. At least the comics code is dead. Fuck that.
Yeah,
heroes
look,
and villains. We can do heroes and villains.
I'm gonna say this, and I will fight anybody with words and maybe fists if you want to. I don't know. I think we are in a new golden age of comic books. I think comic books, there's more, far more, and far great, like as far as like great, not just quality, because that's obviously subjective, but the number of books, the range of content within comic books that exists today is fucking, you can't even comprehend it.
Right.
There is something for you, whatever you like. There's something for you, even if you don't know you like it yet. You know,
yeah, because
it's out there. Comic books are doing it. The industry is doing well generally.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much more than superhero comics. Superhero comics I respect and love and appreciate. I always will, because of what they've meant to me and what they've done to keep the industry alive. But that's really just the money coursing through it, the main vein of the industry. There's so much more.
A lot of good sci-fi comics, a lot of good indie books. Even some cape books are kind of genre defying. A lot of good Punisher books are almost horror comics. Guardians and Iron Man have drawn heavily from different sci-fi themes over the years. So yeah, it's there's a lot out there. Check out comics. Go to your local comic book store and just, drop a $5 and pick something up.
Well, and then one thing I wanted to point out too. So comic book creators used to wait, let me get it prepared here. They used to look a certain way, and some of them still do. You got your Dan Slott-esque specimens, right? And that's very much of he's a descendant of the, and look, I'm not putting the guy down. None of this is to insult anybody. You get your Bill Gaines zizzes.
Yep.
There's definitely a sort of common physicality of your comic book creator. That
the only way that you can really,
that's the wrong thing. That's how it was, and they're still around. Those guys are still around. There's some great ones.
Oh yeah.
However, now we also have comic book creators who look like this. Whoops.
Mm-hmm.
What a world. What a fucking world. I love it.
Yeah.
And that's Leah Williams, amazing creator. Wrote the aforementioned X Factor series that was canceled too soon. And what's she writing now?
I don't know. And I feel stupid that I don't.
Me too. But I mean, she's around doing stuff, and she's always putting queer rep in there. She's bisexual herself, and very much not against saying, hey, here's me and what I bring to the table. You know what I mean? In many photos that you can find on her social media. So yeah, I'm objectifying, whatever.
Yeah, it's fine. It happens.
She's putting it out there. So
she's very pretty.
She is very, very, very pretty and very, very talented.
And incredibly talented.
I really do wonder sometimes about stuff like X Factor. It must have just not been selling well for whatever, but it's not because it wasn't good.
No, it was amazing. I think part of the thing with the Krakoa books is, if I have a complaint, well, everything is pretty good. There's a lot of it, and it's all dense.
There's a lot of it. It's all dense, and to me, I don't know that I've read anything that is just not, at the very least, pretty good.
Yeah, like there's a couple of, I think like the middle chunk of Excalibur was kind of repetitive.
Yeah, I didn't. Okay, so Excalibur, I just wrote that off as not being for me because of the magic and Britishness of it.
That's fair. It is very magic and very British.
So this is a moment like this is not even a focal point of a story. This is a like a tertiary moment that isn't. This is not about a story about North Star. It's not a story about his husband Kyle. They're part of it, sure, but like it's actually a story about Scarlet Witch and named for Magneto. Weirdly, it's kind of a bait and switch.
Trial of Magneto, yeah.
But yeah, it's then at the end of it, the way it resolves, and you end up with this moment where famously North Star had a baby that he had adopted that had AIDS virus, I believe, and did not make it. Around the same time that he also came out as gay, very, absurdly flying through the air in the middle of a superhero fight. I'm gay.
Right, a little over the top.
But it's still a moment that's important historically. Because he couldn't say that.
Right.
You weren't supposed to say that. But here he is now. He's saying, remember I had that daughter. And because of the actions Scarlet Witch took in this book, she made it to where they can actually resurrect that baby. That previously, unless Cerebro had scanned a mutant's brain, they couldn't just bring the person back through the resurrection. But now Scarlet Witch did some chaos magic on that shit. Now they can't.
That was a great Scarlet Witch story, a great story for these characters. Also, Kyle became one of my favorite characters through this era because, for those who don't know, he's just a dude. He's just a human, and he's like one of two humans on Krakoa. The other one is a baby.
And it's good that they're honoring that because of this would seem like bullshit if
they didn't.
This was 2012. Astonishing X-Men 51. First mainstream gay marriage.
Yep.
And you know what I didn't know until I was looking at this? I owned this comic, and I also owned another comic that I never made the visual connection, that it is very much referencing this one.
Yeah. It really is. I hope Kyle and North Star's relationship is less this.
Well, I mean, they got there eventually, these kids. They had a rough couple of decades. Their marriage now is generally pretty good.
Well, they discovered polyamory and it worked out for them. So
it's fine now.
Sometimes you just need to go to Wolverine.
They all died for a while and came back, and maybe that changes the perspective on relationships just a bit too.
Right? Yeah, they've all been around the merry-go-round a few times.
And then one last thing to end on, just so we're not talking about fascism and stuff.
We'll still do Heroes and Villains.
Yes.
You told me to make sure to hold you to that, so I'm
okay. Then as soon as I'm done with this, real quick, this is not even a thing. This is very brief. So this was in the 90s. This was one of the ways that just basically, if you're smarter than the people who are running the code, so to speak, whatever example you're talking about, you just got to be a little clever, I guess, and you can get away with stuff. So here's the golden age of Peter and Mary Jane's marriage. Their 30s, they're married couple.
Right.
And he's gonna give her the Venus butterfly. She's still take two. And unlike Batman, clearly here, Spider-Man can do that.
Real heroes do oral.
Yeah, munchbox. Whatever phrase you want to use. I don't know.
However you want to phrase it.
So that's it. All right, heroes and villains.
All right. Well, we're gonna go heroes first or villains first?
Dealer's choice.
All right. Well, let's do villains because I can end on our heroes. And I'm gonna say villains. The United States Senate and House of Representatives. I forget which one had the comics hearing.
It was Senate.
It was the Senate. Okay, fuck them. Just like.
I mean, that's just kind of true generally. We can just have them.
Kind of true generally, but I feel like they had a big hand in all of this going down. They threatened to regulate speech. So fuck you.
And as we see later on, and I think maybe even the next episode, I don't remember what we plan to do, but soonish, we'll be covering a topic that shows that they learned from this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, if we do this kind of on purpose, we kind of drum up this stuff ourselves, we can use that to our political advantage.
Oh yeah, the music.
And you can kind of see the I don't know. We'll have to talk about it, but like there's a history of intentional panic being, to where it leads to where we are right fucking now, where it's just like very obviously intentionally coordinated and pressed to lead directly to a political outcome. But yeah, Senate, villain. Did we say last time we said that Wortham was both?
Yes, Wortham was both.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, what? So Wortham in his life before this did a lot of good things that our friend of the show, A. Christian, pointed out. He did therapy for people of low means, including Black people, at a time where that was unheard of. He was a lawyer involved in civil rights issues, in parenthood, actually good causes. He was wrong on this one thing and dug in on it. And I think that if there's something I have noticed in life over the last few years, the worst thing you can be in a way that will just destroy your life is if you are a righteous person who can't entertain the possibility that they're wrong.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and there's examples of that now all the time. So like, correlation and causation. You ever heard the phrase correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation?
Right.
In this case, a correlation of a rise of juvenile delinquency and a rise of kids reading comic books. And if you just go, well, look at that. That's obviously, that's the cause. And you just decide that from the get-go, and then you don't do any real scientific studies on anything.
Right.
And you just go, well, all these kids are reading comics, and every kid that gets in trouble is also reading comics. You do the same thing with video games, then you realize how absurd it is. And then today, you get, well, look, all these people are, coming out as non-binary and trans and gay and stuff. And then like, there's
Sup?
Huh?
Sup? Go on.
Oh, sorry. I misunderstood. But yeah, like thinking that is just a sign of something other than what the reason is because people are becoming cooler about people being themselves. Generally, younger people are, and the older people are not reacting well to it.
Not even a little.
Nonetheless.
So yeah,
I said that a lot today.
Wortham, kind of both. Mostly complicated.
Stan Lee, kind of both.
Kind of both.
Like, he was perfectly willing to just go, yeah, government, I'll do it. No, I'm not going to knock him points for that, I guess.
And I mean, we're talking about drug education at a time before the war on drugs too. Sure. So
if only drugs would have been approached with that type of kind of, I guess they really were. There was a lot of commercials in the 80s that were basically that Stan Lee comic all over again.
Well, I think they take out the thing that it boils down to, right? Is I think why those comics work is because they maintain the human element, right? Here is your protagonist. You know them, you know their friend, you know the people around them. And then in the middle of their life, this thing happens and you have to, the story goes through all of that where you have things like all the don't say or the just say no ads where it is vague and doesn't really show you anything, or you have Dare that just kind of makes it sound cool. And just like unhelpful things that don't really get into what the stories do, which is that these things have a life consequence that is more than just you did a thing once, right? It is all of these knock-on effects that you get to see in story form that you don't get in a 30-second commercial.
Yep. I did want to throw a wrinkle into the Wortham thing, though.
Sure.
What would the industry have been like if, I don't know, he hadn't come along and done what he did? Like, it's almost impossible. It is impossible to imagine.
Impossible to say, yeah.
it could have been, I don't know, somehow worse somehow. I don't know. Like it definitely wouldn't have had certain restrictions on, you know, real human beings and stuff like that. But those restrictions would have found their way into culture some other way, I'm sure.
Right. I
don't know.
It's hard to say. I guess my thought is that there always would have been a Wortham. If not him, then someone else.
Fucking A, man. Oh my God. Yeah, I'm gonna actually remember that phrase anytime I start to question stuff like this, like historically.
Because there will always be someone writing about this. There will always be a politician who wants to agitate for one thing or another. And those two forces will always meet to make the attempt, right?
Are you saying that forced adversity is a naturally occurring phenomenon in society?
I'm saying that in human cultures...
I'm sorry, I put a big question on you right here at the end.
You did. Okay, so in human civilization, there will always be those that are looking to abuse others. And there will always be those who emotionally gravitate to putting blame on something that can be used by the former to advance their cause. And I think that is part of the reason why, you know, when we're talking about these panics and stuff, it's a lot of the same. It's a different style of music, but the lyrics are the same.
The lyrics, as we saw at the beginning of the episode, are about golden showers and ass vapors, apparently.
I guess so.
Bringing it back to poop. There you go, Ryan.
Dane, that's really shitty of you.
All 16 people watching must really be enjoying this through line of comedy.
They're really stuck in it.
It's a running joke.
Yeah, it's just on their shoe. I don't know. I'm out of comedy. I'm done. I'm out of here. Ryan, what have you got working in your kitchen over there?
What are you cooking?
I was just going to add Alan Moore's name to the heroes list as well, because
really
DC
any creator
printed...
who just kind of took worked in the medium even post this panic is kind of a hero in a small way.
Yeah, definitely.
Must not have been very cool or popular anyway.
Yeah, just because for DC, Saga of the Swamp Thing was rejected by the Comic Code Authority, so they published from the issue that was rejected onwards, they published that saga, that series without the CCA stamp on it. They just didn't bother.
What year was that?
That was 85.
Okay. So yeah, that was definitely one of the ones that informed their 89 stance.
Right.
Definitely.
We already know we don't need this shit.
Right.
Yeah, because that comic was aimed at a slightly older audience anyway, and it didn't affect sales by not having the CCA stamp on it. So obviously they knew by that point that it had run its course.
I also think that Alan Moore, as far as like how we look at the comics industry, is one of the major through lines of people who have proven that comics aren't a genre but a medium.
Yep.
Because he's written fucking every genre you can think of. To varying quality.
Yeah. I mean, I would say none of them are bad. Like, I would say the best, at worst, some of them are weird experimentals.
Yeah, I think the last League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was just like Old Man Yells at Clouds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's kind of that now. Like he's
yeah.
We did that conversation on last year, I think, around my birthday about he had come out and said that superhero comics are just inherently kind of leave the fact that they're so popular, the movies are popular, that means we're becoming fascists. Essentially, it's like,
right.
It was a good conversation. I really do need to edit that down and upload it. God, I have so much stuff backed up. But yeah, Alan Moore, he's a wild guy. He worships a fucking snake dragon thing or something.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, he's a chaos magician.
No, it's a sock puppet.
Same thing.
He believes in a religion.
Though? Does he realize it's a sock? But no, I'm kidding.
Yes, no, absolutely.
His ass has not fried his brain.
No, it's a very clever satire about religion. It's a bit similar
like
to
the
the
flying spaghetti monster type thing.
Exactly like that. Except that I think he found out that this was an actual. I mean, this may just be something he made up, but I think he found it was an actual Roman deity that turned out to be a sock puppet.
So, and here's just something I want to leave you with. That's kind of creepy. This is weird. This is I don't know what to make of this, but I was looking for photos of Mr. Wortham, and I found one. And I took a closer look at the comic that he's holding, and it's like, whoa. Criminal by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips.
Wait, what the fuck?
How did this happen?
Photoshop is how that happened.
No, come on. Now I'm trying to do a mystery thing. All right.
Sorry, I ruined.
I downloaded that just thinking it was the regular image. I didn't really, and then I look and I'm like, wait a second, what the fuck?
I will say, you called him the devil. Pull that pic back up.
He doesn't. Yeah.
Archmage called you out in chat. That should have been Isom.
I thought about it as I was doing it. That would be fun, yeah. But that would almost be giving it credit.
That's fair.
I feel like if Isom was coming out at this period in history, he would have been like, every comic book that exists is terrible. This one is pretty harmless, though. It's toothless. It has nothing you feel nothing reading this comic.
Nothing really happens. So you called him, you thought when you were younger, you thought he was the devil. And I don't know. He's kind of got like this face that's kind of like sheep or goat like. So I could see the resemblance between him and old goat face that you could think he's the devil.
Well,
he does look a bit like Max von Sydow in Needful Things. So.
See?
True. Shit. Well, I mean, let's go to the source and see what we got here. Here is I think this is actually a stock photo.
the truest of sources.
Yeah, that seems right.
Yeah, I think that. That the old Goatface and Wortham, they have some family resemblance.
Guys, y'all gotta start getting your friends to watch this podcast and stuff, so I can justify printing off some shirts with this on there. That'd be so cool.
Oh yeah.
But you don't want to order just one or two. You want to do a.
You gotta order a batch, yeah, and you gotta store them somewhere while you ship them out and stuff, and it's a whole big deal. So like.
But you want a shirt with this old goat face on there. Fucking hey, man. How cool.
So step one, go to Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, get the shirt of Dane's religious deity. My brain died.
Are you force adversing against my religion now?
No, I am singing its praises.
Okay.
So go get a shirt with the face of the savior of comics, the martyr, Will Gaines. Oh my god, I'm losing my ability to speak. Do that first. Then, if you're not subscribed to Patreon, you should go down in the links and subscribe to Patreon. And then that way, Dane will have the money to print shirts, and then we can all buy shirts. Yay! Woo! Shirts. That's the plan. Do it. Make it happen.
Yeah, and as soon as I think I'm at 16 patrons. As soon as I hit 20, I'll kick in. They have a function you can do through Patreon where at certain intervals, patrons will get a T-shirt or a hoodie or something like that. So like as soon as I hit 20, which maybe a while, but like if I hit 20, then I'll enact that, and that's when it will be financially not a loss basically for me to do that. And then they make them. They charge me a few bucks. They charge you, and then it's kind of incentivizes anyway. Yeah. And I also what I need to fucking remember is that I think I'm allowed to give at least one free trial of Patreon.
Ooh,
being a patron to me. So I don't know.
The first it's free.
First one's free. It's just like good crack dealer, but yeah. None the effing less.
And then after that, go to your local comic store and buy some comics.
And then also, read a queer comic, man. Like,
oh fuck yeah.
Read a sex positive comic. I know that I'd turned on, pun intended, Neil Wirecat's comics. I turned them on to Money Shot, which is a more recent book about a team of scientists who want to go into space, and or they want to actually, what is it? They want to do some kind of crazy super science research, but they can't fund it. They don't have the money. And they decide the way that they're going to make the money is to go into space and shoot porn with
space
aliens, with each other and aliens. And there's just all this crazy alien sex and sex with each other. And, it's like all, everybody's having sex with each other, right? Like,
sure.
And you have porn star names like Niels Bohr and such, and it's really funny. And
so it's
all
horny and nerdy.
It very much both of those things, and then they're constantly like live casting it back from drones that fly around them as they're fucking the aliens and different planets, and they live cast it back to Earth, and people on Earth are watching it, and they make a lot of money. So good times. Money Shot.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
And Ryan, videos. What do you got going on video wise?
Well, I'm script writing at the moment. I've got lots of ideas in the pipeline, so I'm trying to get lots of script written so that I can sort of get ahead of everything, as my Columbo series is almost at an end.
Damn!
Wow!
So I've got some good ideas that I'm working on. I'm doing. I'll be doing videos on famous flops. That's films that were not box office successes that have now become classics. That's more of a retrospective and review. I'm also doing comic book movies ? As in comic book films that don't feature superheroes. So I've got
nice.
Men in Black, your Matrixes.
Not the Matrix specifically, because that didn't start out as a comic, but yeah, Men in Black, and some of the indie stuff like Ghost World, American Splendor, Road to Perdition. I don't know if anybody saw the film from a few years ago, Death of Stalin, but that was originally based on a comic book.
Wow.
You know what?
And no, go on.
I'm excited about all those, and you exemplify ambassadors, not gatekeepers, because with your choice of content, you're implicitly saying you and your fucking lowbrow superhero nonsense, but you're not actually saying it, and I respect that.
Well, actually, it came about in exactly the opposite way. I mean, the reason I don't cover comic book movies is because of like everybody else is doing it. And no, I will not be covering Mrs. Columbo. Apologies for that.
Is there really a Mrs. Columbo?
What?
There is. Oh, this is going to blow your mind. A bit of background. It was done by the studio with none of the creative team who created Columbo involved. They thought it was a terrible idea because they cast a much younger woman to play the role, and it was such a failure that they renamed it in a later series, in the second series, to distance it from Columbo. And Mrs. Columbo, or Kate Columbo as she's known in it, was played by a young Catherine Janeway.
Oh,
wow.
See, I thought you were going to it was going to be really like she's actually played by what's the same guy? I forget his name.
No, not Peter Falk in a wig. Okay. No,
but no, yeah, I do
plays
remember that vaguely now. That watching some retrospective on Voyager, I think that I had learned of that.
But no, the reason I wanted to do the comic book movies that weren't superhero based is just to make people aware that there was a period in the early days of the comic book movie boom where studios were commissioning independent comics, and it's not all about capes. So anybody that says comic book movies are anybody suffering from comic book movie fatigue. I don't think it exists.
No, I mean, I think it's much like comic books themselves. These stories are as good as, I mean, it's really just a vehicle to, you can, a superhero story can be as fantastical or not as they want it to be. So you can have your Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you can have your Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and that's where the fundamental flaw in looking at it like that is, and why they're constantly wrong, even if they're not breaking records as blockbusters anymore right now. But
yeah, comic books are a medium, not a genre.
And so with that, I don't want to hold us any longer. I can tell we're all tired. I mentioned Falcon and the Winter Soldier because just it's kind of out of left field, but I think it relates. So we go from talking about a long period in comics where you're essentially not supposed to challenge authority, presumably and definitely including the military and the purpose and function and the acts of the modern contemporary military. And then now, and this relates to something that I definitely want to get into both on this show and elsewhere. It's just a very dense conversation that's going to have a bunch of times, I think, in the future. But this channel that I was turned onto a while back, she's nailing it. So this woman is, I think she's a former Air Force, something like that, or maybe Army. And she is just going to be commenting on Falcon and the Winter Soldier and the idea that it is somehow fascist propaganda. And that's what we're leaving you with. Take care of each other and yourselves, and
yes, have a
value your loved ones, and love yourself, and then value yourself, and also love yourself in more ways than one.
You can't tell me what to do. You're not my real dad.
Well, we're gonna have to talk about that. See you Wednesday for the initiative stream. We got some cool stuff planned, and have a good one.
So again, as a disgruntled PTSD veteran who loves to shit on the government and expose their bullshit, I think there's a difference between propaganda and seeing a presence on screen that you don't feel comfortable seeing. Your discomfort in seeing military portrayed does not automatically make it propaganda. And again, I ask, what's the alternative? How realistic would it be to not include the military in this storyline? And the fact that this show is spitting some pretty anti-government, anti-military themes does not sell it as propaganda for me. Why does the military keep on supporting Marvel so heavily? Let me offer you a very roundabout perspective. There's nothing that the armed forces fears more than negative press. Marvel needs access to government assets to make these shows and movies. If the military pulled out of Marvel entirely, like they did for the first Avengers movie,